Chapter 177. Little Baozi ran away with his Yuya. Xiao Qing pulled out the knife and cut the blood. She removed the skin and bones, took out the internal organs, and put them aside. She cut the skin and meat, marinated some of them, and sliced the rest into slices. How about barbecue for lunch today? Xiao Qing found a large iron plate and placed the meat neatly on it. In addition to the pork, there was also chicken and rabbit meat. They were placed separately and filled the plate. Since she said that she would eat like this, naturally no one objected. Yan Hanqing went straight to the car to take out the grill and set it up with Yan Qiue. Gu Chuan took the prepared charcoal and Gu Panpan carried the seasoning out. Even Xiao Tong and Xiao Qing cleaned the meat slices together. Kai Yingying and the others were stunned when they saw them working together. There were some who took their children out, but they had never seen a group of paranormals who lived like a tourist during the apocalypse and had picnics every day. Especially Xiao Qing and the others, they had everything. It was obvious that they were experienced. It was not the first time they did this. Xiao Qing cut the meat into a medium thickness. The thicker ones were used to barbecue, and the thinner ones were boiled on an iron plate. They could be dipped in the sauce and eaten. Xiao Qing did not waste the internal organs. She cleaned the edible parts and stored them. They could be eaten after cooking them in the evening. After that, 3 big plates of meat slices were placed in front of the group. There was half a wild boar and several small wild animals. It was enough for a few more people. The barbecue rack was set up, the charcoal was heated, and the seasoning like cumin was put on one side. Xiao Qing began to barbecue. The group of people sat around, each holding a bowl. Once the meat was cooked, Xiao Qing would sprinkle the seasoning on it and give it to them. In the beginning, Kai Yingying and the others were still a little reserved and embarrassed to reach out their bowls. Later, they reached out faster than anyone else. After all, Xiao Qing's roasting speed was very fast. If they were late, there would be no more food. Wild boar meat was more chewy and tasted better than domestic boar meat. This mutated wild boar tasted even better. After being roasted, there was a layer of golden oil on the surface. With seasoning sprinkled on it, it tasted fresh and fragrant, making people almost swallow their tongues. The chicken and rabbit meat were also very tasty and were especially popular among the younger ones. Xiao Qing also roasted some meat slices until they were almost cooked and dipped them in the sauce. Yan Qiue especially liked this way of eating. The dipping sauce was made by Xiao Qing herself and it tasted very good. Yan Qiue finished a pile of meat slices by herself. They ate happily, but Xiao Qing didn't stop. When she was almost done with the barbecue, she took out a wild boar leg. She roasted it directly over the fire and brushed oil on it as she roasted it. In the later stage, she didn't need to brush it anymore because the golden oil would come out by itself. Some oil dripped into the fire, and with a sizzle, there was a burnt smell. The group of people who were eating immediately raised their heads and stared at the boar leg. The boar leg had been roasted until it was golden and crispy. Xiao Qing cut it with a knife, and the white and tender meat could be seen steaming from the cut. She sat there and cut a piece, dipped it in the sauce, and ate it. In fact, the meat didn't taste much in her mouth and she would spit it out later. However, after not eating for a long time, she felt like she was no longer human. Although Xiao Qing wasn't a living person, she was unwilling to admit that she was already a monster in her heart. Yan Qiue immediately came over quietly. He blinked his beautiful eyes and looked at the boar leg in Xiao Qing's hand. Xiao Qing sliced a few pieces and put them in his bowl. After Yan Qiue ate it, he continued to stare at the boar leg in Xiao Qing's hand. Xiao Qing couldn't help but laugh and scold, "Look at you. Aren't there some roasted meat slices over there? Go eat that. It's not as fragrant as the one in your hand." Yan Qiue said matter-of-factly, "Anyway, it's such a big leg. You definitely can't finish it. I'll help you finish it." Go away. Who needs you to finish it? Xiao Qin pointed at the small pot at the side. Don't eat too much. Leave some space in your stomach. There's still a pot of soup for you to finish. Yan Chiua, QAQ. Chapter 178. After solving the problem of lunch, the group continued to move forward. Along the way, Kai Yingying was telling them about the Jingdu survivor base. Xiao Qin listened quietly, occasionally asking questions that were neither painful nor itchy. Slowly, they got to the bottom of the story. There were a total of 4 top mercenary groups in the Jingdu survivor base. Kai Yingying's family's mercenary group had more than 300 people, and more than 200 of them were ability users. However, in Jingdu, they weren't even ranked near the top, let alone the top. They could only be considered above average. Among the 4 mercenary groups, one of them was made up entirely of beautiful women. The leader was Wu Jiaojiao, and the mercenary group was named after her nickname, Thorns and Roses. Although Thorns and Roses wasn't the strongest among the 4 mercenary groups, the charm of beautiful women was great. A group of beautiful women was enough to make many people willing to go through fire and water for them, so very few people were willing to offend them. The second mercenary group was famous for its numbers. There were nearly 1,000 people in this mercenary group, and among them, there were 500 to 600 paranormals. The leader was a metal paranormal. This mercenary group was called Mad Demon. There were no requirements to join the mercenary group. As long as you were a paranormal, you would be accepted. The third mercenary group was called Ice. There were more than 100 people in the group, and they walked the path of the elite. Among the 100 or so people, 100 of them were paranormals, and all of them were above level 2. The leader was said to be an ice paranormal. The last mercenary group was more strange. There were only a few dozen people in the group, but it was ranked as one of the top 4 mercenary groups in the Kyoto. It was said that among the dozens of people in the group, the weakest was a level 3 paranormal. Every one of them had a unique skill. They kept a record in the Kyoto, and that was, they had a 100% completion rate for all the missions they took. This was undoubtedly very scary. The top mercenary groups in the Kyoto definitely had one thing in common, and that was that there was at least one level 4 paranormal in the group. It was said that the leader and deputy leader of the last mercenary group, Dark Thorn, were both level 4 paranormals, and the leader was only one step away from level 5. Xiao Qin thought that her strength had improved very quickly, but in the end, she found that there was always someone better than her. Kai Yingying's family's mercenary group was called Storm. Although it wasn't as awesome as the other mercenary groups, it was still a large mercenary group with 300 members. Therefore, Kai Yingying was still very proud of it. Perhaps it was because both males and females wanted to show off in front of the person they liked. Kai Yingying had indeed revealed a lot this time. Previously, she had let Xiao Qin know that her strength was among the top in the capital. For example, in Kai Yingying's family, the strongest person was her father, who was currently a level 3 paranormal. As long as he broke through to level 4, their mercenary group would truly step into the ranks of first-rate mercenary groups. In addition to the mercenary group, there was one more thing to note. Kyoto was still under the control of the country's leaders, so the rules in Kyoto were relatively complete. There were also simple laws. In general, it was stricter than the average survivor base, but also more stable than those extremely chaotic bases. Therefore, the population of Kyoto survivor base was equal to 2 Linchuan survivor bases, and the population of S-City survivor base was even more incomparable. After learning about Kyoto, it was almost afternoon. Xiao Qin and the others stopped to rest for the night. Dinner was still prepared by Xiao Qin. In fact, Xiao Qin liked to cook. More importantly, Yan Hanqing was her assistant, so Xiao Qin didn't need to do anything. Therefore, she was able to cook very quickly. Chapter 179. After making soup, they were full and ready to sleep. There was too little space in the car, so it was not suitable to continue sleeping in the car. They had to set up tents. However, there were only 2 tents. Even if they were set up, they could not fit more than 10 people. Therefore, someone had to sleep in the car. It was safer in the car. In the end, it was decided that Little Bun, Xiao Tong, Gu Pan, and Yan Qiuyue would sleep in the car. The others would sleep in the tents. Xiao Qing's people had a tent, and Kai Yingying's people had a tent. Xiao Qing was still responsible for the night watch. In the first half of the night, a man from each side was responsible for the night watch. In the second half of the night, Xiao Qing was responsible for the night watch. Xiao Qing also slept in the car in the first half of the night. After 12 o'clock, she went out to change shifts with the other 2 people. Xiao Qing slept soundly until midnight, then got up to change shifts. In fact, there was no danger in the vicinity, because they were not far from the capital. In this location, the ordinary zombies had been cleared, unless there were wandering zombies or mutated animals, but the number would be very small. Therefore, the so-called night watch actually meant that they did not sleep at night and paid attention to the surrounding situation. If they were really sleepy, there was no danger in taking a nap. Xiao Qing was a very responsible person, and she did not need to sleep, so naturally, she would not be lazy. In the early morning, Xiao Qing sat on a big branch, swinging her legs to enjoy the night wind. Suddenly, a person sneaked out of the tent. At this moment, there were 2 people outside. One was Yan Qiuyue, who was peeing, and the other was Xiao Qing. As soon as the person came out, Xiao Qing noticed. After all, she was quite conspicuous. Yan Qiuyue did not notice that he was sleepily behind the tree, and then took out, cough cough, peeing. While he was peeing, he was suddenly hugged from behind. Yan Qiuyue, who was still in a daze, was startled and almost did not want to do anything. As soon as he was hugged, the first thing Yan Qiuyue did was to pull up his pants, stuff his baby, and then break away from the hug. Yan Qiuyue was very careful. As soon as the person hugged him from behind, he came to the conclusion that it was definitely not Xiao Qing. Xiao Qing would not do such a thing, and she was taller than the person behind him. After confirming that it was not Xiao Qing, it did not matter who the person behind him was, because as long as it was not Xiao Qing, even if the emperor came, he would not be hugged. Ko Heng, his body and spirit, they were both his wife. No one should even think about touching it. After shaking her off, Yan Qiuyue heard a muffled groan. He turned around and saw Kai Yingying squatting behind him with a pitiful look on her face. She held on to her ankle and said, "I sprained it." When she said this, Kai Yingying's expression was very fragile, and she looked very pitiful. At least, she could arouse all kinds of desires in men, such as the desire to protect, to conquer, and so on. Among normal men, 9 out of 10 would not be able to stand such a delicate beauty like her acting coquettishly. The remaining one was called Yan Qiuyue. He was very calm. "What are you doing?" Kai Yingying had never seen a man who did not know how to take care of women. He was simply unromantic to the extreme. The beauty was already so obvious, why was he still pretending to be serious? Wasn't it obvious what she meant? In the middle of the night, a man and a woman alone, what else could they do? Did she have to say it out loud? Kai Yingying's face was a little red. Although she was a very bold girl, she would still be very shy if she said something like asking for sex, okay? Yan Qiuyue was exceptionally cold. "You should go back to sleep." Chapter 180. Kai Yingying's originally rosy face turned a little pale. She said with some difficulty, "Qiuyue, you know what I mean." Yan Qiuyue said very calmly, "I said you should go back to sleep." Wasn't it an obvious rejection? Kai Yingying had never been rejected so ruthlessly in her life. While she was a little embarrassed, she was also a little angry. "Why did you reject me? Am I not good looking? Or do you mind if I have another boyfriend?" He's just a dispensable existence. His existence is just to make me happy. If you mind, I can kick him away immediately. Don't be mistaken, okay? I have no interest in you at all, so isn't it natural to reject you? Yan Qiue's lips had a cold smile. He tilted his head. If it wasn't because Xiaoqing was about to go to the capital and he didn't want to cause trouble for Xiaoqing, he would have already pulled out the tongue of this chattering little girl. Kai Yingying's face turned even paler. She couldn't help but cover her mouth. It looked like she was about to cry. After a while, she had a flash of inspiration. You have someone you like, right? That's why you rejected me. Yan Qiue didn't say anything. This was the truth. He didn't need to explain anything. Did he need a reason to dislike someone? If he really had to find a reason, it would be that she was the best one he had ever seen. Who would be willing to compromise? Moreover, he had not only seen her, but also had her. So he was even more unwilling to compromise. How am I worse than her? Kai Yingying didn't need to think to know who Yan Qiue liked. There were only 4 women in this group, including her. Although Gu Panpan's appearance was delicate and pretty, she had a carefree personality. Xiao Tong could also be considered pretty, but she was mute. Although Xiaoqing was a widow, she was too beautiful. Kai Yingying knew that in terms of appearance, she was definitely not worse than Xiaoqing. However, there was one area where she was not as good as Xiaoqing, and that was her temperament. Temperament was something that couldn't be forced. It was gradually cultivated and tempered by time. Only then would it have its current fragrance. Therefore, there were many women who, even if they were no longer beautiful, still had an intoxicating temperament. That was why there was the term, still charming. Xiaoqing was such a woman. She was good-looking and had an outstanding temperament. Even if she was a widow, many men would like her. But Kai Yingying just couldn't understand. I don't look worse than her, and she's a widow. I've never married. I'm still young. Why do you like her but don't want to be with me? Yan Qiue's expression immediately turned ugly. These words were particularly harsh to him. He really wanted to say, how is Xiaoqing worse than you? Who gave you the confidence to compare yourself with Xiaoqing? You can't even compare to one of her little toes, okay? Yan Qiue didn't even have the desire to talk to Kai Yingying. He walked forward with a cold face. Yan Qiue felt that if he stayed any longer, he would really not be able to control himself and kill Kai Yingying. That would bring a lot of trouble to Xiaoqing. Although he was never afraid of trouble, he didn't want to bring any trouble to Xiaoqing. I'll give you 2 choices. First, shut your mouth now and go back to sleep. Second, I'll let you sleep forever. Yan Qiue curled his lips. When he said this, his expression was exceptionally cold and sinister, with a hint of gorgeousness. This kind of Yan Qiue was simply dazzling to look at, but also so dangerous that it made people's hands and feet turn cold. Kai Yingying bit her lower lip and said confidently, "You won't kill me." Even if it was because of her identity, Yan Qiue wouldn't do it. Although she said so, Kai Yingying clearly felt Yan Qiue's murderous intent. He really wanted to kill her. This thought made Kai Yingying very discouraged. It was the first time in her life that she liked someone so much. It was also the first time she wanted someone so badly. However, this person only wanted to kill her. Wasn't this a very desperate thing? Really? Just because of your identity? The coldness in Yan Qiue's eyes was released without any scruples. If she really annoyed him, killing a person would really be like eating and drinking. However, Kai Yingying was quite sensible. When she saw Yan Qiue's expression getting colder and colder, she knew that his patience was about to reach its limit. Kai Yingying didn't dare to challenge Yan Qiue's bottom line. She got up and ran away. When she was about to leave, she said very seriously, "I won't give up." The more dangerous a man was, the more impulsive she was to conquer him. Yan Qiue rubbed his forehead and felt like he was about to collapse. Soon, his hand stiffened because Xiao Qing's joking voice came from behind him. "You're very popular. It's just that you're too cold to girls." Wait. Wait. Did Xiao Qing hear everything just now? QAQ. Chapter 181. Yan Qiue immediately turned around and opened his arms. "It's cold on the tree. Come down first." Xiao Qing jumped down, but she didn't want to jump into his arms. Yan Qiue was a little unhappy, but he hugged Xiao Qing. "You know I like you. Why are you making fun of me?" Xiao Qing blushed and pushed Yan Qiue. "Go back to sleep. It's already midnight," and Xiao Qing glanced at Yan Qiue. He came out to pee, wearing only a shirt and pants. He looked elegant, but he didn't have any warmth. Especially after doomsday, the temperature at night would drop very low. Even paranormals with good physiques would bring light foldable tents in the wild. Yan Qiue really wanted to spend some time alone with Xiao Qing. Since Xiao Qing joined her friends, they didn't have the chance to be alone. It was too hard for Yan Qiue, who was like a teddy bear. Sob, 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 sob. It was okay that they didn't have the time to be together, but it turned from a world of 5 or 6 people to a world of more than 10 people. Yan Qiue only wanted to kill all the people who hindered him from pursuing his wife. However, he still suppressed his dark thoughts. No matter what, at least he couldn't cause trouble for Xiao Qing. Yan Qiue looked at the sky and couldn't help but lean forward and secretly kiss Xiao Qing before returning to the tent. Xiao Qing touched her face and let him go. She found a place where she could take shelter from the wind and see the surroundings clearly and continued to stay there. The next day, Kai Yingying was obviously colder than yesterday, but it could be seen that she didn't give up. After walking for nearly 2.5 hours, they saw the gate of Jingdu. The north gate of Jingdu was very retro. It was said that it was built by an emperor. In short, it looked quite magnificent. The flow of people at the gate of Jingdu was much more than other survivor bases, and the line was longer than other bases. However, Xiao Qing and the others were led by Kai Yingying and the others, so they didn't need to line up at all. They just cut the line, registered, and entered Jingdu survivor base. They were paranormals from other bases, so it was more convenient than those who didn't register in any base. At least their origin was clearer, and they didn't have to fill in anything when they registered. Jingdu was indeed the largest survivor base in the country. After entering, they felt different. It was bustling with people and dense stalls on both sides of the road. It was a little more prosperous than other bases. It had been a long time since doomsday. Most of the country's areas had stabilized. The survivors' bases built by humans accommodated most of the survivors, and those cities were almost all occupied by zombies. The only survivor base built in a city was in Kyoto, which was one of the reasons why Kyoto had a special status. After all, even if all the cities had fallen, people didn't want Jingdu to fall into the hands of those monsters. Jingdu was now the religion of many people. After surviving, many survivors rushed to Jingdu, which was why there were so many people in Jingdu. "Is this your first time in Jingdu?" Kai Yingying's smile was a little stiff. After all, she was still young and couldn't be without embarrassment in front of people who had rejected her. Xiao Qing nodded. Even though she had seen a lot of the world, she still sighed. She didn't expect to see such a prosperous place after doomsday. Chapter 182. Let me show you around first. Don't leave. Come to my house. I want to thank you. Kai Yingying smiled. The others agreed. The paranormals who escorted Kai Yingying were from her mercenary group. They were sent back home by Kai Yingying as soon as they arrived in Jingdu. Only a young man with a gloomy expression looked at Yan Qiue. This young man was called Lu Yusen. He was Kai Yingying's boyfriend in name, but in fact, he was Kai Yingying's gigolo. Lu Yusen's appearance was not bad. Otherwise, Kai Yingying would not have taken a fancy to him. However, the men he met in the past few days were all outstanding. His appearance was not bad, but compared with a few men, he was like dust in the ground. Lu Yusen was afraid. He didn't have any abilities, so he could only rely on his face to make a living. It was really difficult to find a generous and good-tempered sugar daddy like Kai Yingying in Jingdu. However, a man appeared out of nowhere and wanted to steal his job. This man was much better looking than him. How could Lu Yusen not be nervous? How could he not hate him? Every time he saw Yan Chiue, he couldn't wait to push him into a pile of zombies. How could a paranormal steal a sugar daddy from an ordinary person? What Lu Yusen was most afraid of now was that Kai Yingying won Yan Chiue's heart and then threw him away. At that time, where would he go to cry? To be honest, women were a vulnerable group in the post-apocalyptic world. However, there were many capable and powerful women, such as the boss of Thorns and Roses, Wu Jiaojiao. However, the more capable a woman was, the more powerful she was. She was used to the dirty things in the post-apocalyptic world. Her heart and hands were more ruthless than men. Women like Kai Yingying didn't need to rely on others. She relied on her father to live a good life. Therefore, Kai Yingying was well protected. She hadn't seen the dirty things in the post-apocalyptic world. Therefore, her personality was relatively good. Even if she was a little arrogant, she was much easier to serve than those ruthless women. Lu Yusen didn't want to change his sugar daddy. When he heard that Kai Yingying wasn't going to part ways with these people and was even going to be their tour guide, Lu Yusen was a little anxious. He couldn't help but say, "Yingying, if you don't go back, your father will be worried. Why are you so troublesome?" Kai Yingying glared at him. "If you have something to do, you can go back first. By the way, tell my father that I'm hanging out with my friends." Lu Yusen immediately stopped talking. It was better for him to follow. At least he could watch how things developed. No matter what the result was, he could feel more at ease. After reprimanding Lu Yusen, Kai Yingying smiled and said, "The Kyoto survivor base is divided into 5 major parts. The most central part is where all the high-ranking officials live. The east side is where all the major mercenary groups live. The east side is where all the paranormals live. The east side is where all the paranormals live. The west side is where the ordinary people live. Although this area is almost destroyed, there are many tents, and they don't need to pay rent. The south side is where the training ground and storage center are, and the north side is near the gate. So the mission center, the market, and the police station are all here. The place we are going to is the shopping street." After Kai Yingying's explanation, Xiao Qing and the others understood the situation of the whole capital. For example, the police station in the capital was like an official team of paranormals in other survivor bases. It was responsible for patrolling the base and dealing with some special situations. It was similar to the police, but it also acted as an army. Chapter 183. What was different from the ordinary police force was that the police station here was made up of mutants, and they were not low-level mutants. The official mutants would not be included in the ranks of the top 4 or 5 mercenary groups, but their strength was definitely not to be underestimated. Otherwise, they would not be able to suppress these mercenary groups. Xiao Qing was eager to give it a try. Setting up a mercenary group seemed like a great idea. Oh, what should her mercenary group be called? After thinking for a long time, Xiao Qing realized that the 2 words Baby Meng were what she liked the most. However, it was too troublesome to set up a mercenary group. Moreover, there were only a few people in her team. Even if there were new members joining in the future, there would not be more than a dozen of them. What kind of mercenary group was that? The market in the capital was exceptionally lively. The few shopping streets that were very famous before the apocalypse were now occupied by various shops. Those who had money and strength would rent a shop, while those who did not would set up stalls on both sides of the street. There were all kinds of things being sold. Some sold clothes and jewelry, some sold guns and ammunition, some sold cold weapons such as daggers, some sold medicine, and even mutated animals and plants. Although those mutated animals and plants were very lethal, there were some more special animals that could be domesticated. For example, dogs. Even after mutating, many dogs still maintained a high degree of loyalty. After being domesticated, they could help their owners fight zombies. However, only the rich could afford to raise them, because mutated animals ate a lot of food. As for mutant plants, they were generally sold to wood-type paranormals. Many wood-type paranormals were relatively weak in the beginning, especially those who took the support route. Such paranormals either had their own teams to help them obtain mutant plants, or they could only buy them themselves. Xiao Qin was very curious. The mutated plants that she had subdued were all rare species, especially her vines. Although they existed when she awakened her ability, they were especially powerful. Not only could they level up with her, but they could also absorb other plants. Her vines had the highest potential among all her plants. Although she didn't have enough space to tame other plants, Xiao Qin still wanted to see what the plants sold in these shops looked like. Kai Yingying saw that Xiao Qin was looking at the shop on the street, so she led them in. The business in the shop was average. After all, a wood-type paranormal only needed one plant per level. As soon as they walked in, someone came up to them and asked, "What kind of mutant plants are you looking for?" "We have both attack and support." Xiao Qin glanced around. "Let me take a look first." Most of the mutant plants were covered in glass bottles, and each bottle had a label on it. The label contained the name of the mutant plant and its abilities. Xiao Qin glanced around and fixed her gaze on a long, winding vine that looked like a snake. Then, she looked at the label. This kind of vine was called snake vine. Its ability was to entangle and release poison, but it was relatively fragile. It could entangle level 1 zombies, and the poison it released could paralyze level 1 paranormals. 1 second, Xiao Qin was a bit embarrassed. Level 1 paranormals. 1 second. What was the use of that? She had to look at the rest. Next to her, there was a pot that looked like a flower with a light bulb in the middle. The plant's ability was to release a strong light in an instant, blinding people. The effect was very similar to a flash bomb. But generally, zombies didn't rely on their vision to find people. This thing was useless against zombies, but against humans, it could only flash for a moment and occupy a spot. What was the use of that? Chapter 184. Next to it was a black sawtooth grass. Its leaves were thin and long, with teeth. The label said that it was deadly poisonous. What was the use of poison? Apart from being poisonous, this kind of grass didn't have any other ability. Did it expect people to cut their fingers on the sawtooth of the grass? If it met a strength-type mutant, it probably wouldn't even be able to cut it. However, Xiao Qin felt that this grass was still useful. For example, it could be used to squeeze out its juice and smear it on weapons. However, one grass could only be used a few times. It couldn't be used for its poisonous effect. So in the end, it was still useless. More importantly, these plants were very expensive. A useless snake vine was priced at 100 crystal nuclei. The current currency was nuclei. Generally, the price was level 1 nuclei. A level 2 nucleus was equivalent to 10 level 1 nuclei. As for level 3 nuclei and above, it couldn't be measured by this conversion. After all, level 3 nuclei and above were too difficult to obtain. Zombies were generally stronger than humans because they were not afraid of pain. Even if they lost 3 limbs, they could still crawl over and bite people. Therefore, when a paranormal of the same level encountered a zombie of the same level, it was usually the human who retreated. However, If they fought with their lives on the line, humans were still stronger than zombies. Because humans were more intelligent than zombies, if they fought with their lives on the line, the paranormal's chances of winning were higher. In order to obtain level 3 nuclei and above, several high-level paranormal had to kill 1 or 2 zombies at the same time. Only then would the success rate be higher. Therefore, when it came to level 3 nuclei and above, it couldn't be said that 1 nucleus could be exchanged for 10 level 2 nuclei, because the price was not equal. When the paranormal strength was generally improved, level 3 nuclei would be classified as the most common currency. However, even if level 1 zombie nuclei were everywhere, 100 of them was not a small number. One should know that 100 level 1 zombie nuclei could be exchanged for a few hundred kilograms of food. How long would a few hundred kilograms of food be enough for a family? This snake vine was relatively cheap. Xiao Qin asked specifically and found out that this snake vine had the chance to evolve with the paranormal strength, so it was a little more expensive. Xiao Qin suddenly felt that she was a big local tycoon. She could casually take out those mutated plants from her body and take them out. That should be a sky-high price, right? Thinking about it, she was also a person with a net worth of millions of nuclei. His mood instantly improved. After walking around, he didn't see any outstanding plants. All of them were of little value. Some of them weren't even worth much, but their prices were very high. After looking around, Xiao Qin was ready to leave, because there were no mutant plants that she was interested in. It would be a waste of time to stay. Kai Yingying looked at Yan Qiuyue for a long time, but she didn't say anything. Thinking that Yan Qiuyue didn't have enough crystal nuclei, Kai Yingying secretly glanced at Yan Qiuyue and said enthusiastically, "Sister Qing, do you have any mutated plants that you like? You can tell me. We've been through thick and thin together. I'll buy them for you as a thank you gift for taking care of me along the way." Xiao Qin shook her head. "I don't like any of these plants. They don't suit me." The seller in the shop knew Kai Yingying and knew that she was a fair, rich, and beautiful woman. He didn't want to lose this deal, so he hurriedly said, "Don't go. We have more mutated plants in our shop. If you don't like any of them, you can come inside with me. There are some new ones inside, and they're better than those outside." Xiao Qin waved her hand. She was now at level 4, and she had 4 mutated plants. Besides, she didn't want to change them. She just wanted to watch the show, so she didn't want to waste any more time here. It was better to go to other shops. Chapter 185. Kai Yingying thought she didn't want to spend money, so he pushed her to the second floor. There were more mutant plants on the second floor. Some of them were similar to the plants below, and some of them were species that had never been seen below. The seller went to the innermost part, where there was a row of mutant plants. Just by looking at the appearance, it was better than the ones outside. The seller said enthusiastically, "These are all caught by the mercenary group that cooperates with our shop. Look at this one, it is a mutation of the Nepenthes. Not only can it kill small mutant animals, but it can also kill level 1 zombies. But when the zombies are dense, you can't release it, because it can simulate the smell of blood, which can easily attract a large number of zombies." Xiao Qin was stunned for a moment. Wasn't this a mutant plant similar to her man-eating flower? But the effect was a little worse. This Nepenthes could only attract zombies or mutant animals by its smell. It was very likely to be self-defeating and then be killed by the zombies that surrounded it. Her man-eating flower not only had a better effect, but more importantly, it could also move and kill zombies. It could even beat paranormals. Her man-eating flower was obviously better than this Nepenthes, so Xiao Qin directly shook her head, indicating that she didn't like it. The seller had to point to the next mutant plant and said, "Look at this one, spring flower. It can emit a kind of fragrance that can make zombies temporarily lose their sense of smell. It is very suitable for escaping when surrounded by zombies. Its fragrance also has a certain effect on paranormals, but it is certainly not as good as the effect on zombies. How long does the effect last? Xiao Qing went straight to the point, and the seller said a little awkwardly, about half a minute, I guess. Xiao Qing immediately looked away. 30 seconds. If she was surrounded by a large number of zombies, she couldn't escape at all. If the number of zombies was small, she could deal with it alone, so it was completely useless. The seller touched his nose and continued, if you are not interested, you can take a look at this. This is a blood vine. The strength of its entanglement can break the neck of an average person. It is similar to the strength of a python. Xiao Qing had her own vines, and they were poisonous. They were much more effective than this thing, so she continued to shake her head. After introducing a few more varieties, the seller became a little impatient. In his opinion, these mutated plants were all good, but Xiao Qing kept shaking her head as if she didn't care about any of them. Either her standards were too high, or she couldn't afford the price. Even Kai Yingying said, if you're interested, just tell me. I'll pay for it. Xiao Qing said indifferently, it's not that I don't like it, but the mutated plants here are not as good as the ones I have. To put it bluntly, the level of the mutated plants here was too low for her. The seller changed from embarrassment to annoyance. His shop was quite famous in Jingdu. He had all kinds of low-level, mid-level, and high-level mutated plants. Many wood paranormals were his regular customers. Xiao Qing's words pulled down the level of his shop. It would be strange if he didn't get angry. The seller didn't even care about Kai Yingying's face. After all, his backer was no worse than Kai Yingying. He immediately said sarcastically, our shop is too low level. It's normal that you don't like it. You are at least a level 4 paranormal, right? Xiao Qing said seriously, I don't mean to belittle your shop. It's just that there are no mutated plants that I need here. I have almost all the plants you mentioned, and their effects are slightly stronger than yours. Chapter 186. Xiao Qing's words were very frank, but the seller understood that Xiao Qing wanted to slap him in the face. He immediately said unhappily, oh, is it a high-level mutant plant? Maybe it's a twice-mutated plant. He had to admit that he really knew the truth. Xiao Qing was really a level 4 paranormal, and her vines had already mutated for the 3rd time. However, Xiao Qing didn't mean to show off at all. She smiled and was ready to leave. Why should she show off to a shop owner? It was cool to slap someone in the face, but it would attract hatred. She had just arrived in the capital, and it was not good to be too high profile. However, Yan Qiue didn't want to see his fiancée being bullied, so he immediately sneered, judging from your tone, it's not as simple as looking down on people. Qing, take out your worst mutant plant and show it to him. Let him broaden his horizons. When he looks at people in the future, don't look at them from the crack of the door. It's easy to see yourself as a cross-eyed person. Xiao Qing said helplessly, let's go eat something. I'm hungry after walking for so long. The shop owner immediately said, don't. Let me broaden my horizons. Xiao Qing had no choice but to let the man-eating flower out. Every time the flower came out, it was like a reincarnated hungry ghost. It followed the smell to the food, and its saliva was about to drip out. A liquid that looked like saliva dripped from the petals and landed on the floor. Immediately, green smoke rose. The floor was made of ceramic tiles, so it was quite sturdy. However, when the saliva-like liquid dripped down, it immediately corroded a small hole. The flower shook its head and immediately set its eyes on the pitcher plant. Probably because 2 tigers couldn't live on the same mountain, it rushed up and directly broke the glass cover. Then, it swallowed the trembling pitcher plant in one gulp. After swallowing it, the flower exhaled a fishy sweet smell like a burp. Then, it nestled at Xiao Qing's feet with satisfaction. Xiao Qing touched its head, and then said embarrassedly, the flower is used to being free, and I can't control it. I'm really sorry for the loss. How many crystal cores does this pitcher plant cost? Just take it that I'm buying it. The seller was silent for a moment. To be honest, as soon as this man-eating flower came out, he knew that he was going to be slapped in the face. The big flower's corolla was twice the size of an ordinary man-eating flower. The color was gorgeous, and when the petals wriggled, he could see the shark-like stamen inside. It was much better than his nepenthes. Then, as expected, he was slapped in the face. Yan Qiue sneered at the side. He adjusted the angle of his lips slightly, and the sneer turned into mockery. Ah Qing, I'll pay for you. Make me feel that it's not worth the price. The sound of the slap was so loud that he almost couldn't hear it. The seller's lips twitched, and in the end, he cupped his hands and said, I'm too short-sighted. Take this nepenthes as a gift from me. Please accept my apologies. The shop owner was quite good at dealing with people. Since other people greeted him with a smile, Xiao Qing naturally understood the situation. Before she left, she still took a dozen level 2 zombie crystal cores and put them on the table. After leaving the shop, the way Kai Yingying looked at Xiao Qing changed. How should she put it? Although Kai Yingying didn't think that Yan Qiue was telling the truth, that this man-eating flower was the worst among all the mutant plants she had. However, this man-eating flower had already defeated most of the mutant plants with wood power. Didn't you see that the pitcher plant didn't dare to resist? Xiao Qing's strength was definitely not low. She had to slightly change her strategy towards Xiao Qing. Xiao Qing's strength was higher than she had imagined, so she couldn't use too rough means. Although Kai Yingying had always thought that Xiao Qing must have some strength, otherwise, even if she was beautiful, it was impossible for her to bring a child into a team with her body alone. However, the facts told her that Xiao Qing's strength was definitely not low. She had joined the team with her own strength. Kai Yingying had always thought that Yan Qiue was the captain. After all, it was Yan Qiue who made the decisions in the beginning. After leaving the shop, Xiao Qing took a group of people to eat. After all, even if she wasn't hungry, Yan Qiue and the others would be. Kai Yingying picked the place to eat. After all, Kai Yingying was more familiar with the capital, so it was easy for her to find a place. It was said that this restaurant was very high-end in the capital. All kinds of leaders and senior members of major mercenary groups would come here to eat. Correspondingly, the price here was relatively high. Before entering the door, Kai Yingying patted her chest and said that she would pay. Xiao Qing was about to refuse, but then she glanced at the menu and didn't say anything. A dish of stir-fried meat with green pepper cost 81 nuclei. Even if she had money, it would be painful for her to spend it. However, in the doomsday, most plants were difficult to grow. Even if they were grown, they would mutate. Some of them would mutate and produce toxins. If one tried it carelessly, he or she might be poisoned to death. Therefore, the price of vegetables was even higher than that of meat. This was very normal in the base. Xiao Qing looked through the menu and finally ordered 2 dishes, stir-fried meat with green pepper and stir-fried eggs with tomatoes. Yan Qiue gave her face and ordered a lot of dishes. When he was ordering, he looked at the price first, then the name of the dish. The dishes he ordered, not to mention the taste, first of all, the price looked very scary. As for Gu Chuan and the others, they didn't order at all. They let Yan Qiue order all the dishes. Let alone Kai Yingying, even Xiao Qing felt a little painful. More importantly, after Yan Qiue ordered, he smacked his lips and said, "Give me a bottle of wine. It's our first time in the capital, and we're all gathered together. Don't drink too much. Give me a bottle of red wine to set the atmosphere. I'm a poor person, and I really want to try 1982 La Fight or 1984 Modally Hero. Just give me a bottle." Kai Yingying's fingers twitched. After a while, she said, "There might not be a 1984 Modally Hero here. there shouldn't be a 1982 La fight either. The waiter standing aside said kindly, there's number 1984 Modally Hero here, but there's a 1982 La fight. Kai Yingying was speechless. Then how about a bottle of 1982 La fight? What do you think? Of course, I'll listen to you. Yan Qiue looked at Kai Yingying and deliberately showed a charming smile. Kai Yingying immediately felt a little dizzy. She was dazzled by his beauty. She immediately nodded and said, no problem. Isn't it a 1982 La fight? Give me a bottle. Yan Qiue kept his expression and continued to look at the menu. How could he let go of the opportunity to rip off a spendthrift so easily? Then he ordered a few dishes that weren't considered precious before the apocalypse, but were extremely expensive after the apocalypse. Kai Yingying's heart was bleeding. She was quite rich. After all, she had a rich father. Her father would give her a sum of crystal nuclei every once in a while for her to spend. However, the amount was certainly not a lot. After all, crystal nuclei were obtained through fighting. Because of Yan Qiue's exploitation, the crystal nuclei she had saved for a long time were about to be used up. Sure enough, after Yan Qiue stopped, the attendant at the side immediately smiled and said, Xing Hui, 2,538 grade 1 crystals. I'll round it off for you. You only need 2,500 crystals. Please come to the counter to settle the bill. Kai Yingying was speechless. Chapter 187. Although it was painful, it was just like how a man would pretend to be fat even if his face was swollen when he was trying to woo a girl. What made Kai Yingying want to vomit blood was that after the dishes were served, Yan Qiue took a bite and said with disdain, it can't be compared with what you made. It tastes so different. Kai Yingying was about to cry at that time. If she had spent money to buy Yan Qiue's affection, it would have been fine. After all, she really liked Yan Qiue, so it was worth it. However, she spent money to buy Yan Qiue's disdain. Xiao Qing couldn't stand it anymore, so she poked Yan Qiue. After all, they still needed Kai Yingying's help to find Air Dai's whereabouts, so it wasn't good for them to make things awkward. Yan Qiue pouted his rosy lips, opened the wine, and poured himself a glass. Xiao Qing didn't like drinking, because she couldn't control her feelings after getting drunk. She felt very insecure. Yan Hanqing and Gu Chuan didn't drink either, but Gu Panpan insisted that he had never drunk such high-end wine in his life, so he wanted to try it. He poured a glass, and Kai Yingying and Lu Yusen drank the rest. Yan Qiue only drank one glass. After drinking, he didn't say anything. He just held his chopsticks and looked at Xiao Qing seriously. Xiao Qing couldn't eat anymore. She silently picked up a piece of meat for Little Bun, then cleaned the spices and other spices on it. When Little Bun was almost finished, she didn't want to eat anymore. She waited for them to finish eating, then stood up and left together. As soon as Yan Qiue stood up, she felt that something was wrong. Yan Qiue walked straight, and looked very stiff from the back. He almost hit the door frame because he didn't turn the corner. Xiao Qing instinctively pulled him to prevent him from hitting his beautiful face. Xiao Qing held Yan Qiue's hand, then he turned to look at Xiao Qing. His expression was very serious and calm, but Xiao Qing felt that his gaze was very blank. Yan Qiue stared at Xiao Qing for a while. After a long time, his eyes lit up, and he threw himself on Xiao Qing. In broad daylight, he was panting and whining. He even said in a tone as if he was abandoned by a jerk, I love you so much, but you don't love me. Don't you say I'm not cute? How am I not cute? Tell me, I'll change it. Tell me, you've touched my entire body so many times, I'll definitely be able to say it. Xiao Qing's expression was stupefied. She pinched Yan Qiue's chin and looked at him carefully. Then she realized that Yan Qiue was indeed drunk. His pupils were a little slack, and his gaze was blurry. Although he looked very serious on the outside, it was actually because there was no expression on his face. At this moment, Xiao Qing felt that the expressions of the people around them were strange. Their burning gazes pierced her body like needles, and there was a kind of thirst for gossip. She couldn't resist it. When Xiao Qing held Yan Qiue, he was still rubbing himself against her, and as he did so, he whined, "I like you so much. I gave you my most precious first time. You have to be responsible for me. How can you like the new and dislike the old? Look at me, am I not good looking?" Xiao Qing silently slapped his face, and then said to her friends, "He's drunk. Let's stop here for today. Is there any place we can stay for the time being?" Kai Yingying, who was originally a little twisted from jealousy, immediately smiled and said, "Find a place to stay. Just stay at my house. We're all friends. Don't be polite with me." Chapter 188. Xiao Qing frowned slightly and said, "Qiue is quite drunk. If it's too far away, I'm afraid he'll go crazy from the alcohol and won't be able to control himself. Let's just stay nearby. My house isn't far from here. Let's go to my house. It's much more convenient than staying outside," Kai Yingying said fervently. She had already put it this way. If Xiao Qing still refused, it would be disrespectful. She said helplessly, "All right then. Sorry for the trouble." "It's no trouble, no trouble." Kai Yingying almost couldn't suppress the joy in her heart. Yan Qiue was drunk and was about to move into her house. Wasn't this the best opportunity? After the group left the restaurant, they turned and went to Kai Yingying's house. Kai Yingying's house was in a small villa. Just by looking at the appearance of the house, it was more luxurious than the others. According to Kai Yingying, the row of villas nearby all belonged to her family. She could live there as she pleased. Kai Yingying naturally didn't bring Xiao Qing and the rest to her father's place. That would make many things inconvenient. She brought Xiao Qing and the rest to her own house. This kind of villa was a two-story villa. The top floor had a private theater and a swimming pool. Xiao Qing and the rest each chose a room to stay in. Yan Qiue was placed beside Xiao Qing's room. However, after helping Yan Qiue onto the bed, Xiao Qing was unable to leave. First, Yan Qiue tugged at her, refusing to let her go no matter what. Tears were about to fall from her eyes as she begged to be whipped, her small waist swaying vigorously. After much difficulty, Yan Qiue was finally tucked into bed. Xiao Qing was worried that he would have a headache when he woke up, so she made a bowl of hangover soup for Yan Qiue to drink. Not long after, Kai Yingying came over with a bowl of honey water. "Sister Qing, I made a bowl of honey water. Drink it for Qiue. It can help with the hangover." Xiao Qing didn't tell Kai Yingying that she had already given Yan Qiue the hangover soup. She only smiled and took it. "Sorry to trouble you. I didn't expect him to pass out after one cup. Come and sit for a while." Kai Yingying quickly waved her hand. "What's the trouble? I won't be sitting. Sister Qing, you should rest early too." "Well, I have to take care of the children in a while. You are tired after a day. Go back and rest." Xiao Qing chuckled. Kai Yingying left wisely. After she left, Xiao Qing put the bowl of honey water on the table and went to the bathroom. After all, she had eaten a lot at noon and now she had to vomit it all out. Xiao Qing was now used to vomiting 3 times a day. In the beginning, it was very uncomfortable, but now it had become a common occurrence. When she finished vomiting and was about to pour some water to rinse her mouth, she saw Yan Hanqing sitting at the table. His expression was very cold, but his eyes were very indifferent. After Xiao Qing came out, she poured herself a bowl of water. "Why are you here? Come and take a look. He's quite drunk. I'm afraid you can't handle him alone." Yan Hanqing pursed his lips. Xiao Qing drank some water and rinsed her mouth. Then she said, "Are you thirsty? I'll get you a glass of water." Yan Hanqing picked up the bowl Kai Yingying brought and said, "It's not cold yet. I'll drink this." After taking a sip, he found that it was sweet. He was stunned. "Is this honey water for Yan Qiue?" He drank the hangover soup. "You drink it." Xiao Qing looked at the time and said, "I'll have to trouble you to help him take a bath later. He must be uncomfortable sleeping with the smell of alcohol. I'll go back and see if the children are naughty. You go. Leave this to me." Yan Hanqing said softly. Xiao Qing was relieved and went back to her room. Yan Hanqing helped the drunk Yan Qiue to the bathroom. Chapter 189. Bathing a drunkard was a very troublesome matter, especially when the drunkard was so drunk that he was unconscious. Yan Hanqing struggled for nearly an hour before he finished bathing Yan Qiue and pulled him out of the bathtub. Perhaps it was because he had stayed in the bathroom for too long, but Yan Hanqing kept feeling a little hot. He unbuttoned his collar and sat on the stool beside the bed, waiting for Xiao Qing to come back. After a while, there was a knock on the door. Yan Hanqing thought it was Xiao Qing, and his heart suddenly stirred. The words that he usually did not dare to say or do became an indescribable impulse that lingered in his chest. Yan Hanqing took a deep breath and went to open the door. Before a smile appeared in his eyes, he saw Kai Yingying. Kai Yingying was also stunned. "Where's Sister Qing?" "She went back to take care of the child," Yan Hanqing said with a little disappointment. Kai Yingying's eyes were a little anxious. She forced a smile and said, "Brother Qing, you should go back and rest too. I'll take care of Qiue. After walking for so long, everyone is tired." Yan Hanqing shook his head and said, "I'm not tired. You go back and rest. I'll take care of him." Kai Yingying hurriedly said, "Let me do it. I know how to take care of someone better." "No need. I just bathed him." What he meant was that Yan Hanqing was still naked, and it was not suitable for a girl to come and take a look. Kai Yingying was completely dumbfounded because Yan Hanqing closed the door after he finished speaking. She stood at the door for a long time, feeling very uneasy. In the end, she gritted her teeth and left. It seemed that it would be very difficult to make a move tonight. Yan Hanqing sat in the room, feeling more and more stuffy. His collar, which had already unbuttoned a button, was now unbuttoned again. A small part of his honey-colored chest was already exposed. He used his fingertips to wipe his forehead, and there were already small beads of sweat seeping out. Even the slowest person could sense that something was wrong. He was a little uneasy, and an increasingly obvious burning sensation slowly rose from his lower abdomen. It would be a lie if he did not know what was happening to him. Yan Hanqing was a little helpless. He had been fatally injured before, and his heart had almost been pierced. His ribs had been broken 3 times, and other minor injuries were needless to say. However, he had never been in such an embarrassing moment. Other than embarrassment, he was also panicked. After sitting in a daze for a long time, Yan Hanqing sneaked into the bathroom like a thief. He was prepared to solve this problem before Xiao Qing came. Not long after he entered the bathroom, Xiao Qing came over. Xiao Qing knocked on the door, but no one came to open it. The door was not locked, and she twisted it open. There was no one in the room, only Yan Qiue lying quietly on the bed. His fair face had an intoxicating blush, and that extreme white and extreme red created a huge contrast. It was so gorgeous that it made people want to take a bite out of him. Xiao Qing's heart was a little itchy. She sat on the side of the bed and lifted the blanket to take a look. Then, she realized that Yan Qiue was not wearing anything, and there was even a smell of shower fragrance on his body as he lay under the blanket. Xiao Qing was speechless. She decisively covered herself with the blanket. What the eye does not see, the heart does not grieve over. The moment she covered herself with the blanket, Xiaoqing instantly had this thought in her mind. Anyway, she had seen his entire body, and more than once, so what was there to be shy about? With that thought, Xiaoqing silently lifted the corner of the blanket and stuffed Yan Qiue's slender arm under it. Probably because she had a guilty conscience, she suddenly heard a suppressed low moan. Although it was just a sound, and very much like an auditory hallucination, it made Yan Qiue withdraw her hand with a whoosh. She calmly looked to the left, in the direction of the bathroom. The sound seemed to have come from there. After a long time, just when Xiaoqing thought that she was hallucinating, another sexy and low moan was heard. Chapter 190. She took a deep breath and went into the bathtub. She carefully washed herself inside and out 3 times before getting out of the bathtub. Her body was clean and her strong recovery ability had removed all traces. However, Xiaoqing still felt very uncomfortable, both inside and outside. Yan Hanqing was different from Yan Qiue and Dai. Although he was usually very quiet, he was full of aggressiveness at that time. Xiaoqing remembered the feeling of being unable to control everything. After coming out of the bathroom, Xiaoqing calmed down and decided to put this matter behind her. Then she went to the kitchen to make a bowl of soup for Yan Qiue. Yan Qiue was drunk yesterday. Although he didn't drink much, his stomach was very weak and needed to be warmed up. Xiaoqing didn't know that while she was busy, Yan Qiue opened his eyes and quietly looked at the kitchen. His eyes were almost filled with blood. He got drunk quickly and woke up quickly. He woke up before midnight last night, which meant that he listened to live sex for half the night. At this time, if one opened his hands to take a look, one would find that his palms were full of crescent-shaped bruises and dried blood on his palms and fingernails. Yan Qiue bit his index finger and stared at the remaining button on the ground. The murderous intent in his eyes was about to condense. Soon, his index finger was bitten until it was dripping with blood, and his flesh was torn open. When Yan Qiue estimated that Xiaoqing was about to come out, he opened his palms and stuck out his pink tongue to lick the blood on his palms and fingernails clean. He didn't want Xiaoqing to find out that he was actually sober last night. He also didn't want Xiaoqing to know that he was full of murderous intent. God knew how much Yan Qiue wanted to kill all the men around Xiaoqing and lock her up. Only he could get close to her and only he could see her. It didn't matter if Xiaoqing vented her anger on him. He could let Xiaoqing vent her anger on him. It didn't matter if she hit or scolded him. Yan Qiue even thought that Xiaoqing might be angry at him. However, she was a person who was cold on the outside but warm on the inside. As long as she didn't know that he killed her teammates, she wouldn't hurt him even if he put her under house arrest. After all, she cared about everyone around her. As long as that person entered her heart, this cold-blooded murderous woman would give him endless tolerance and gentleness. But as soon as he thought about it, Yan Qiue didn't want to hurt Xiaoqing like this anymore. Yan Qiue turned around and rolled over. The little devil in his heart kept clamoring to kill Yan Hanqing, kill Gu Chuan, and kill all the men who wanted to steal her away from him. Before he could roll himself into a ball, Xiaoqing had already walked out with the soup. When Xiaoqing saw Yan Qiue rolling around on the bed with the quilt, the awkwardness in her heart instantly surged up. Yan Qiue couldn't have heard it, right? Or maybe he saw a little. Yan Qiue naturally understood Xiaoqing's thoughts. He hurriedly said pitifully, "Ah Qing, my head hurts." Xiaoqing's thoughts were immediately pulled away. She mercilessly mocked Yan Qiue. "Why are you showing off when you can't drink? You were knocked out after 1 glass. Is it glorious to hug me and call me mommy when you're drunk?" Yan Qiue didn't feel ashamed at all. He was like a big worm, wriggling under the quilt. Finally, he wriggled in front of Xiaoqing and hugged Xiaoqing's waist. He blinked his eyes and said, "Actually, this is the first time I've drunk alcohol." His adoptive father was an alcoholic. This caused Yan Qiue to hate alcohol since he was young. Later on, when he grew up, he hated alcohol even more because it made people lose their minds. If it wasn't for Xiao Qing by his side giving him a sense of security and him deliberately tormenting Kai Yingying, he definitely wouldn't have ordered alcohol, let alone drunk it. Chapter 191. In the end, the first time Yan Qiyu drank, it gave him the worst experience. First, he made a fool of himself after getting drunk. When he woke up, he had a splitting headache. More importantly, when he was drunk, someone took advantage of the situation and took advantage of Xiao Qing. Yan Qiyu hated Kai Yingying to death now. He was a smart person. Although he almost lost his mind because of what happened last night, it was only for a moment. After a moment, Yan Qiyu figured it out. With Xiao Qing's personality, unless something happened to Yan Hanqing and she had to do that kind of thing to solve it, she wouldn't do it. Why did Yan Hanqing have to have sex with Xiao Qing? That was even simpler. It must be Chinese medicine. Then why was it Chinese medicine? It was most likely because of Kai Yingying, and Kai Yingying did it because of him. In the end, it was because of him. Drink the soup first before you talk. Xiao Qing pushed Yan Qiyue's head away, ignoring his aggrieved face, and handed him the soup. Yan Qiyu shamelessly acted coquettishly. Ah Qing, my head hurts. Feed me. You have a headache, not your hand. What does it have to do with you drinking the soup? Xiao Qing complained. Because of her guilty conscience, she fed Yan Qiyu. Yan Qiyu was very satisfied with the soup. After he finished, Xiao Qing put down the bowl and prepared to leave. I'm going back to check on the baby. It's not dawn yet. You can sleep for a while. Yan Qiyu nodded obediently. Surprisingly, he didn't stick to Xiao Qing and then shrank into the bed. After Xiao Qing left, he lay in bed, calculating which of the drugs he had saved up could be used to kill that little bitch Kai Yingying. If it weren't for her, Xiao Qing wouldn't have to. The more he thought about it, the angrier Yan Qiyu became. He wanted to kill Yan Hanqing as well. Since he was young, he had never been so desperate to get someone. The feeling of not getting what he wanted almost drove him crazy. It should be said that he was a lunatic, but he learned to endure it for Xiao Qing. When Xiao Qing returned to the room, she saw Xiao Tong sleeping on the outside. Then, Little Bun hugged Yaya and nestled in the middle. Yaya's eyes were about to roll over from the pressure, and his only remaining ear was constantly trembling. Xiao Qing had to adjust the Little Bun's sleeping position before Yaya was released. The liberated Yaya looked at Xiao Qing gratefully. Every day, it struggled between being crushed to death and still having one breath left. If it wasn't for the fact that it might be turned into a braised rabbit head if it tried to run away, it would have used the fastest speed in its life to escape from Little Bun's evil clutches. Xiao was Xiao Yu's sleep of the night too. Xiao Tong was, Little Bun, she was Xiao sleeping, Xiao, little, Xiao, of us. Xiao Qing didn't get into the bed. She went in with the cold air and found a corner to absorb it. She really didn't want the sun to rise, and she didn't want to see Yan Hanqing and Yan Qiyu. The awkwardness was like gangrene attached to her bones, making her feel very uncomfortable. But no matter how much she prayed, the sun still rose. After Little Bun woke up, he groggily dragged Yaya out of bed. Yaya was dragged by his only remaining ear and stumbled on the ground, looking very pitiful. Little Bun was about to wash up out of habit when he saw Xiao Qing in the corner. Little Bun directly pounced into Xiao Qing's arms and called out, "Mama." After confirming that it was Xiao Qing, he curled up in Xiao Qing's arms and played dead. Xiao Qing had no choice but to carry him to wash up. After the last time, Little Bun had a side effect, which was that he became even more attached to Xiao Qing. After all, it was the first time he was separated from Xiao Qing for so long. Although children didn't have a sense of time, Little Bun still became more dependent on Xiao Qing. Chapter 192. The little bun even acted like a spoiled child and asked Xiaoqing to help him brush his teeth and wash his face. It took more than 10 minutes just to wash his face and rinse his mouth. Of course, it was also because Xiaoqing was unwilling to go out. When they had to go out, Xiaoqing took the little bun and Xiaotong out. When they went downstairs, the others were already in the living room. There was a row of seats on the sofa. When Xiaoqing came downstairs, 3 pairs of eyes locked on Xiaoqing. One was from Yan Hanqing. After he glanced at Xiaoqing, he lowered his head and felt a little embarrassed. The second one was from Yan Qiue. He also glanced at Xiaoqing and lowered his head. However, Yan Qiue lowered his head to hide the jealousy in his eyes. The last one was from Kai Yingying. She carefully observed Xiaoqing several times. Her eyes focused on Xiaoqing's neck and the slightly open collar. In the end, she didn't find any suspicious marks, so she lowered her head to hide it. She was full of doubts now. In the end, she could only blame it on Yan Qiue not drinking the bowl of honey water. However, Kai Yingying didn't give up. As soon as Xiaoqing came down, she asked in a roundabout way, "Sister Qing, you're here. Let's eat. Sister Qing, why don't we get a few more bowls of honey water for everyone to moisten their throats first before eating? The honey water is very effective in detoxifying alcohol, right?" Xiaoqing had just cast aside the embarrassment when Kai Yingying brought it up again. She felt that Kai Yingying was actually asking, "The medicine in the honey water is very effective, right? You enjoyed last night, right?" Therefore, Xiaoqing was extremely embarrassed at that time. Yan Hanqing and Yan Qiue were equally embarrassed. However, Xiaoqing was still very calm. She immediately said, "At that time, I was brewing the hangover soup. I was afraid that it would be mixed with honey water, so I didn't give it to Qiue. However, don't drink honey water before breakfast. Drinking a cup of milk would be better." Kai Yingying was completely relieved. She smiled and asked Xiaoqing to sit down. Then she asked the chef to serve the dishes. The chef made a total of 11 dishes, which filled the table. There were 6 vegetables, 4 meat dishes, and 1 soup. It looked very rich. However, the people sitting around the table each had their own thoughts. Each one of them had complicated thoughts, so they didn't eat very happily. Especially Gu Pan Pan. She was scratching her chest as she carefully observed. She felt that something was amiss today, but she couldn't tell what it was. After eating, Xiaoqing proposed to leave. "Now that you're home, we should also leave." Kai Yingying was stunned for a moment. Without thinking, she urged them to stay. "Don't be in a hurry to leave. I'll show you around. I'm the host, so I'm familiar with this place. Also, it's your first time in the capital. No matter what, you should walk around first." Xiaoqing didn't want to stay any longer. Even if she knew that Kai Yingying had the ability to make it easier for her to find air dye in the capital, Xiaoqing didn't want to stay for a minute longer. After such an embarrassing thing happened, she even had the intention to kill Kai Yingying. If she stayed any longer, Xiaoqing was afraid that she wouldn't be able to control herself and would really kill Kai Yingying. If that happened, Kai Yingying's father would definitely take revenge. It would be a lot more troublesome for her to find air dye. "We're really not going to walk around anymore. We still have things to do, so we won't trouble you. We'll meet again if fate wills it." Xiaoqing smiled slightly and prepared to leave with her people. Kai Yingying still wanted to urge them to stay, but someone ran over and said while panting, "Miss, the leader is calling for you. He wants you to hurry over. He has something to tell you." Kai Yingying hurriedly said, "Sister Qing, please don't leave. I'll be back soon." Before she left, she still called for the person who came to find her to help her keep Xiaoqing and the others. After all, if Xiaoqing left, it would be pure fate to meet them again. Kai Yingying liked Yan Qiue a lot. She wanted to keep Yan Qiue and Xiao Qing by her side. After Kai Yingying left, Xiao Qing prepared to leave. However, the person stopped Xiao Qing and refused to let her go. You mustn't leave. Before Miss left, she told me to keep you guys here. If you leave, Miss will beat me to death when she comes back. What does it have to do with me if Kai Yingying wants to beat you to death? Xiao Qing resisted the urge to roll her eyes and turn to leave. Then, the person hugged her thigh. The person was also a talent. He lay on the ground and hugged Xiao Qing's thigh, crying. Just stay a little longer. Miss will be back soon. Xiao Qing didn't say anything. She threw out a vine and dragged him away, hanging him on the corner of the table. Then, she left with Little Bun and the others. She had wasted enough time. She had to find Air Dai. Fortunately, Xiao Qing had a preliminary understanding of the situation in Jingdu. Now, the first step was to go to the mission hall. That was the place with the most paranormals in Jingdu. If there was no other way, Xiao Qing would release a mission to find Air Dai. Air Dai wasn't stupid. He was smarter than most people. Even if he was alone, he could definitely hide his identity. What she needed to do was to release the mission. Whether someone found Air Dai, had news about Air Dai, or Air Dai saw the mission and heard the news, she would have a chance to find Air Dai. The northern part of the Kyoto survivor base belonged to the northeast. That place could be said to be freezing cold. After the apocalypse, the climate had become even more unpredictable. If Xiao Qing still couldn't find Air Dai in Kyoto, he would have to continue north. However, Air Dai wouldn't wander so far away, right? If he woke up, he would definitely follow the direction and go back to find them. Xiao Qing's mood was very complicated as she walked and thought. After walking out of the door, she chose a direction and walked forward. Not long after, she saw a somewhat familiar figure. Chapter 193. That figure was none other than Lin Qifan. He had changed a lot. He had lost a lot of weight, but there was still a fake gentleness in his eyes as he stood among the crowd. Xiao Qing felt as if her heart had been ruthlessly pierced by something. The large hole in her heart was bleeding profusely. Probably because she was too obvious, Yan Qiue couldn't help but pat her on the shoulder. Ah Qing, what's wrong? Xiao Qing shook her head and led them away calmly. She wanted to cut open Lin Qifan's heart and see if it was black inside, but now wasn't the best time. How could that scumbag be compared to Air Dai? When they brushed past each other, Lin Qifan turned his head and only saw Xiao Qing's back. The woman beside him asked, Qifan, what are you looking at? You look so engrossed. Lin Qifan forced a smile. I just saw a familiar figure. I thought it was someone I knew. Lin Qifan thought carefully. How could that be? Xiao Qing was already dead. When the hospital called to claim the body, he didn't even dare to answer. He tossed and turned at night, unable to sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he would see her cold eyes with a gentleness that only bloomed for him. In the next second, he would be covered in blood. At that time, Lin Qifan didn't regret it too much because he had a brighter future. Qin Jiao liked him so much. As long as he married Qin Jiao, the entire company would be his. However, when the apocalypse came and he lost everything, he remembered how good Xiao Qing was. If Xiao Qing was by his side, she wouldn't let him suffer at all. However, after the apocalypse, Lin Qifan was so tired that he didn't even have time to regret. When he saw that familiar figure, Lin Qifan's heart trembled. Lin Qifan thought of Xiao Qing again. On the other side, Xiao Qing's emotions fluctuated for a moment. Then, Lin Qifan was thrown to the back of her mind. She just wanted to find Air Dai. She wanted to find Air Dai as soon as possible. That silly Air Dai would be bullied if it wasn't by her side, wouldn't it? The longer they were apart, the more she missed him. The image of Air Dai staring at her in a daze often appeared in her mind. Besides Little Bun, Erdai was the one Xiaoqing trusted the most in the apocalypse. Besides Little Bun, Erdai was the one who stayed with her for the longest time. The longer one missed someone, the deeper it would be. The longer it fermented, the stronger it would be. In the end, Xiaoqing still couldn't leave. Not long after they left the villa area, they were stopped by Kai Yingying before they could enter the pedestrian street leading to the mission hall. Kai Yingying was out of breath. She pulled on Xiaoqing's sleeve and refused to let go. "Sister Qing, why are you leaving? If someone hadn't come to inform me, I wouldn't have known. Stay for a few more days." Xiaoqing had no choice but to tell the truth. "Actually, we came to Kyoto to look for someone. I lost one of my companions during the last mission. I've already searched all the survivor bases near the mission location. Kyoto is the only one left. That's easy. You should leave this to me. Although my mercenary group isn't big, we still have some power in Kyoto. It's much more convenient than you guys searching everywhere. We can also go to the mission hall and register a mission to find your companion. Sister Qing, stay. Tell me what your companion looks like. I'll let my subordinates look for him. I'll let you guys know if there's any news," Kai Yingying hurriedly said. Xiaoqing thought for a moment and said, "He's young and mute. His temper is like a child's. His bangs are a bit long and cover his eyes." After explaining Air Dai's characteristics, Gu Panpan asked, "Get me a pen and paper. I can draw a portrait." She was an art student. Although she hadn't learned for a long time, drawing a sketch was no problem for her. Chapter 194. Kai Yingying quickly took them back to the villa and found a pen and paper for Gu Panpan. Gu Panpan drew Air Dai. Her sketch was not vivid, but it was quite similar. Kai Yingying took the sketch and asked someone to make several copies. Then, she mobilized her men to start looking for Air Dai in the city. After that, she took Xiaoqing and the others to the mission hall. "Sister Qing, please register the mission and leave your contact information. If there is any news, we can inform you." Xiaoqing described the mission. It was not only about looking for Air Dai, but also about finding Air Dai. She set the reward to be very high. There were 5 level 3 zombie crystals. Even Kai Yingying swallowed her saliva when she saw the reward. After that, they went back to Kai Yingying's villa. Although Xiaoqing did not want to go back, she endured it for the sake of Air Dai. After they went back, Kai Yingying poured water for everyone and said, "Sister Qing, you don't know yet. Something big is going to happen in Kyoto." "What's the big deal?" Xiaoqing asked, but she was thinking about Erdai. She was a little anxious. If she couldn't find Erdai in Jingdu, she could only go all the way north. But the further north she went, the less hope she had. "Japan sent a small team to Kyoto to borrow food," said Chen Xiaobei. Although Kai Yingying had many shortcomings in her personality, she was better than many rich second generations. She was a nationalistic youth. Kai Yingying gnashed her teeth in hatred towards the small island nation that had a grudge against her motherland. Not only her, but many mercenary group leaders in Kyoto gathered for a meeting after hearing the news. The topic of the meeting was how to give the group of paranormals in Japan an unforgettable trip to the Celestial Empire. Japan is a small country. They import all their food. When the apocalypse broke out, their food import channel was cut off. There was not much food in the country. After these days of consumption, they almost ran out. So, they came to our country to borrow food. Kai Yingying gritted her teeth and said, "Why should we lend them food? We don't even have enough for ourselves." But the higher-ups want us to maintain the friendship between countries even in the apocalypse. If we can help, we should help. If we have food, we should give it to the survivors in the base. Why feed those animals? Xiao Qing grasped the main point. You're saying, the Japanese are coming over. Kai Yingying nodded hatefully. I heard that a small team has arrived. All of them are psychics. The leader is a descendant of the Onmyoji. They will arrive in the capital soon. Xiao Qing didn't want to stay, but now that she was asked to leave, she wouldn't. She hadn't experienced those 8 dark years, but she had heard her instructor and coach talk about it countless times. There were also countless missions that were related to destroying that country's private human experiments. Perhaps in the eyes of some people, there were good and bad people in every race, and that race was no exception. Hatred was also a part of hatred. However, in Xiao Qing's eyes, that entire race was almost rotten. She felt disgusted just by looking at it. Since the Japanese psychics were coming over, she couldn't leave. Even if she couldn't slap them in the face, she had to watch that group of people cry and leave. Oh, no, if she found Dummy during this period, she might ambush those paranormals on their way back and make them stay in the Celestial Empire forever. After getting more information about the Japanese team from Kai Yingying, Xiao Qing quietly waited for the news. She didn't leave the villa for the whole day. She was afraid that if she left, she would miss the news about Air Dai. Yan Qiue and Yan Hanqing sat on either side of Xiao Qing and accompanied her as she waited. The two of them didn't look at each other, and it was quite harmonious. Chapter 195. Unfortunately, Xiao Qing waited for a whole day, but there was no news about Air Dai. She couldn't help but feel annoyed. Let's wait for 2 more days. If there is still no news, we'll continue north. Now, let's go back and rest. Xiao Qing gritted her teeth and said. She would never give up looking for Erdai. If she couldn't find him in the north, she would come back and look for him again. The Celestial Empire was only so big. She would find Erdai after looking around once, twice, or 3 times. After everyone returned to their rooms, including Xiao Tong, who had brought the little bun back to sleep, Xiao Qing walked to the balcony. She rummaged through her space for a while and finally found a pack of cigarettes. She lit one up. Actually, Xiao Qing didn't smoke much. People who really smoked would inhale into their lungs. She, on the other hand, only inhaled and exhaled. As the smoke swirled around her, her originally irritated mood really did improve a little. The sun slowly sank, but the moon couldn't be seen rising, and the stars couldn't be seen shining. There were only layers of dark clouds, dark and heavy, blocking all the light. Xiao Qing didn't know how long she stayed on the balcony. There was only 1 cigarette left in the pack, and it flickered between Xiao Qing's fingers. As soon as Yan Qiue came, he choked on the strong smoke and coughed. He almost cried. He fanned the smoke lingering at the tip of his nose and walked up. Qing, why aren't you sleeping? Xiao Qing coughed and put out the cigarette, but didn't put it out. I can't sleep. I feel annoyed. Yan Qiue came over and hugged Xiao Qing's waist from behind. He then put his head on Xiao Qing's shoulder. Don't worry. We'll definitely find it. God knew how jealous he was when he saw Xiao Qing so anxious. He thought countless times in his heart about how to kill all the men who dared to approach Xiao Qing and how to imprison Xiao Qing in a place where only he could see. However, when he saw Xiao Qing's cold eyes, all his thoughts disappeared. No matter how ruthless and good he wanted to be, he couldn't do it. He was afraid that she would hate him, so he suppressed all the dirty and rotten thoughts in the depths of his heart. He was afraid that Xiao Qing would find out if he revealed even a little of it. If Xiao Qing showed a trace of disgust for him in her eyes, he would directly destroy himself. Thinking about it, all the pride he had in his life became dust under her feet after meeting her. At first, Yan Qiue didn't believe it. He didn't believe that there was a woman who could make him fall in love with her. He also didn't believe that there would be someone in the world who would be willing to sacrifice their life for another person. Humans were such selfish and weak existences. How could they risk their lives for another person? Now he had to believe it because as long as Xiaoqing said a word, he would be willing to take out his heart for Xiaoqing. But it's been a day, and there is still no news. Xiaoqing stared at the flickering cigarette between her fingers. It had been crushed once, but it was still burning stubbornly. The irritation in her heart made her want to find someone to fight and vent her anger. Yan Qiue had to comfort Xiaoqing. Don't forget, the Jingdu survivor base is the largest survivor base in the country. The population is more than 10 million. It will take a few days to find all of them. Xiaoqing didn't say anything, but the irritation was getting deeper and deeper. She stared at the cigarette in her hand and suddenly pressed the cigarette butt on the back of her hand. The cigarette butt made contact with the skin on the back of her hand and made a sizzling sound. The smell of burned flesh filled the air, but Xiaoqing didn't feel much pain. When the cigarette butt was moved away, the scar on her hand healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. Chapter 196. Her Highness Queen didn't sleep for the entire night. She woke up early the next morning and made a pot of soup. She stewed a whole hen. After stewing the soup, she tore the hen apart and tore the meat into strips. Then, she added some ginger and chopped green onions to cook the meat. The taste was very delicious, especially the soup. This time, Xiaoqing stuffed some mushrooms and wood ear into the hen's belly. She took out a bowl of soup and put the rest of the meat together with the soup. That bowl of soup was reserved for Yan Qiue. When Kai Yingying's chef came to work with a yawn, he found that the meal was already ready. Breakfast shouldn't be too greasy. Although Xiaoqing's soup wasn't greasy, it was more suitable for drinking at night. If it weren't for Yan Qiue, she wouldn't have made it. Therefore, Xiaoqing made extra porridge, almond and barley porridge. When everyone woke up, the porridge was ready. Each person had a bowl with side dishes and chicken soup. Kai Yingying came over to have breakfast with them. During breakfast, Kai Yingying said, "The accurate news is out. The Japanese team will arrive this afternoon." Xiaoqing thought that it was the news from Air Dai. After hearing it, she couldn't help but feel disappointed. However, she quickly cheered up and said, "Oh. Is this news confirmed?" Kai Yingying hurriedly nodded. "I also heard that although they came to borrow food this time, under the guise of an exchange, they said that they wanted the ability users of the two countries to learn from each other. Only then can they improve. Everyone is holding back their energy now, waiting for that group of people to come and teach them a good lesson." To put it bluntly, the population of the Celestial Empire was astonishing and dense. Therefore, when the apocalypse broke out, there were heavy casualties. But at the same time, the huge population allowed the number of paranormals to surpass other countries. Japan was just a small place, how many paranormals could there be? Coming over for an exchange was a good thing. At least, they could vent their anger. Xiaoqing narrowed her eyes and began to plan. When the time came, no matter what, she would sneak in and take a look. Although she couldn't win glory for the country, she wanted to see them get slapped in the face and vent her anger. Xiaoqing couldn't help but ask, "Is there any news about the person I'm looking for?" Kai Yingying was stunned for a moment and quickly said, "It's my fault. I forgot to tell you. This morning, someone provided information that they had seen a person who looked very similar to the portrait near a small Esper base near Yanjiang. I don't know if it's the person you're looking for." Xiaoqing suddenly stood up. "Which base? What's its name? How long ago was it?" "Sister Qing, don't worry. I'll go with you in a while. Anyway, that base is not far from the capital." Kai Yingying smiled and said, "It will only take 2 to 3 hours to go back and forth. We can still catch up with the Japanese entering the city." Xiaoqing put down her chopsticks and looked around. They were almost full, so she quickly said, "Everyone should be full, right? In that case, let's go there quickly." Yan Hanqing and the others all knew that Xiaoqing was eager to find Air Dai. Now that she finally had news about Air Dai, she couldn't control her emotions. They all put down their chopsticks. Kai Yingying originally wanted to pick Yan Chiue up and say a few words, but now she had to stand up. Then let's go. Kai Yingying brought 2 espers with her. They were both beginner level 3 espers. Her father asked her to bring them along to protect her safety. Level 3 espers were not many. In Kai Yingying's entire mercenary group, the number of level 3 espers could be counted on one hand. If it wasn't for her father's love for her, he would never send level 3 espers to be her bodyguards. It should be known that in ordinary small and medium-sized mercenary groups, a beginner level 3 esper could be the leader. Chapter 197. Their destination was Pengcheng Survivor Base. The base was very small and named after Li Pengcheng. There should be a few thousand survivors in the base. They were all survivors from the nearby towns and were built by the townspeople. It wasn't far from the capital, only an hour and a half away. They were in a hurry, so it took them a little more than an hour to reach their destination. Kai Yingying's father's mercenary group wasn't a big deal in the capital, but in a small base like this, it was a big deal. When the base chief heard that Kai Yingying had brought people over, he led the higher-ups to greet them, giving Kai Yingying enough face. The base chief, Li Pengcheng, accompanied them all the way inside. The ordinary people in the base couldn't help but look over. Kai Yingying felt even more honored. She said to Li Pengcheng humbly, "This time, I came to your base to look for someone." Kai Yingying took out the portrait. "I heard that this person appeared near your base, so I wanted to come and look for him. Mr. Li, can I trouble your base to put up a poster?" Li Pengcheng's gaze was complicated. After a while, he said, "No need. I know him. If you want to look for him, I can take you there." Xiaoqing was very happy. She quickly said, "Then I'll trouble you." Li Pengcheng led the few of them to a tent. The nearby tents were all very simple and crude. Most of the tents had skinny women sitting in front of them. Some of the women were basking in the sun, while others were chatting in groups of 2s and 3s. Li Pengcheng stood outside a tent and shouted, "Fu Jingma, someone is looking for you." When she heard the name, Xiaoqing was disappointed. Air Dai couldn't speak. How could he give himself a fake name? He must have found the wrong person. But then, the curtain was pulled open by a pale, thin hand. From inside, a face that Xiaoqing couldn't be more familiar with appeared. "Who is it?" The man raised his eyes lazily and raised his chin, which was slightly thinner than Air Dai. Xiaoqing was immediately stunned. The person in front of him looked exactly like Air Dai. The only difference was that he looked a few years older than Air Dai, so he was a little taller. Not only was Xiaoqing shocked, Yan Hanqing and the others were also shocked. Gu Panpan couldn't help but say, "Heavens, are they twins? Why does she look so much like Air Dai?" The young man was stunned for a moment and lowered his eyelids slightly. After a while, he raised his eyes and said, "You've met someone who looks exactly like me?" Xiaoqing was very disappointed. She thought that she would be able to meet Air Dai this time, but she only saw someone who looked exactly like Air Dai. Looking at this face, she missed him even more and felt even more impatient. "We've found the wrong person," Xiaoqing said softly, "Let's go. We'll look elsewhere." The young man hurriedly called out to Xiaoqing. "Have you really met someone who looks exactly like me? Is his name Fu Jingshan? If you've met him, can you tell me that my younger brother is missing?" Xiaoqing was about to leave, but she stopped in her tracks. "You're saying that you have a younger brother called Fu Jingshan who looks exactly like you?" The young man called Fu Jingma nodded. "Yes, I've been looking for him for a long time." Xiaoqing thought for a moment and said, "Is he about 17 or 18 years old?" Does he have a crescent-shaped birthmark on his waist? Fu Jinghua hurriedly said, yes, it's him. Do you know where he is? Xiao Qing shook her head. There was an accident some time ago and he went missing. I'm also looking for him. Chapter 198. Xiao Qing didn't know if it was her imagination, but Fu Jinghua seemed to heave a sigh of relief. He smiled gently and said in a low voice, I finally heard news about my brother again. Although it's not very good news, I feel much more at ease. Xiao Qing was silent for a moment and then asked, do you want to leave with me? When I find him, you can reunite. Fu Jinghua grabbed the curtain and said carefully, can I leave with you? His eyes were very beautiful, and the shape was exactly the same as Air Dai's. Xiao Qing couldn't help but think of Air Dai's pair of eyes that were especially dark and shiny when he looked at her. Yes. Xiao Qing nodded. Yan Qiue immediately climbed up. He was almost hanging on Xiao Qing's body and then looked at Fu Jinghua with a smile. Since Qing has spoken, you should pack your things. Fu Jingma's face was slightly red and he said embarrassedly, I don't have anything to pack, then come with me. Xiao Qing calmly pulled Yan Qiue away from her body and glanced at him. Stand properly. Why are your bones so soft? Yan Qiue pouted, feeling wronged. Then, she reluctantly straightened her body. If an ordinary man pouted like that, it would definitely make others feel very feminine, or even disgusting. However, Yan Qiue didn't. He raised his eyebrows and curved his lips. Not to mention his actions, even his subtle expressions were a little seductive. He simply made people feel that he was the reincarnation of a vixen. Gu Panpan secretly complained. Kai Yingying's heart ached when she saw how flirtatious he was. Fu Jinghua indeed didn't have anything to pack. He just packed a small bag and carried it on his back. He followed Xiao Qing. Kai Yingying and Li Pengcheng thanked them and the group left. After all, they were anxious to go back and embarrass the Japanese. Along the way, Fu Jinghua didn't say much. He was very low-key and calm. After Gu Panpan and the rest compared him to Yan Qiue, they also had a faint good impression of Fu Jinghua. They returned at the right time. When they reached the main gate of Kyoto, they coincidentally bumped into the small group of Japanese entering the city. The leader was a young man in a white kimono. His eyes were gentle, and his facial features were not outstanding. However, his temperament made him stand out from the crowd. This should be the successor of the Onmyoji, the representative of Japan's envoy group. Behind the youth was a fierce-looking man in a samurai suit with his hair tied up in a bun. He had a samurai sword on his waist and his steps were steady. He was probably a martial artist before the apocalypse. In the entire emissary group, Xiao Qing only remembered these two people. The one with the bun in the samurai uniform was still alright. He was just a beginner level 4 warrior. Xiao Qing definitely had no problem dealing with him. However, the Onmyoji was more difficult to deal with. Xiao Qing felt a sense of danger from him. Although Japan was a small country, the Onmyoji was not easy to deal with. After all, he was the strongest person in his country. If he was too weak, it would be unreal. Xiao Qing and the rest were at the entrance. They watched the group of people enter the city before entering the city. The ones who welcomed them were the leader of the base's own group of paranormals and a few higher-ups. Xiao Qing looked at them from afar and went back with Kai Yingying and the rest. Fu Jinghua was a person who knew how to reduce his presence. After Xiao Qing and the rest went back, they asked Fu Jinghua to find a room to stay in. Fu Jinghua also knew that Xiao Qing and the rest wanted to chat, so he left. Kai Yingying was also called away. Only Xiao Qing and her friends were left. Yan Qiue immediately asked in confusion, why did you bring him back? Chapter 199. Yan Qiue's intuition was very accurate. He could clearly distinguish between good and bad intentions. Therefore, those hypocrites could never hide from him. Fu Jingma looked very docile, but Yan Qiue instinctively disliked him. Shao Qing explained seriously, he is very likely to be Er Dai's brother. I don't want Er Dai's relatives to be stranded outside. Let's treat it as a surprise for Er Dai. When Er Dai is found, let them reunite. If not, it's fine. We can wait for Er Dai to come back and confirm it. If not, we can just send him away with a sum of crystals. Yan Qiue nodded. Then, he immersed himself in discussing with Shao Qing the route to find Er Dai. After the envoys from the island nation left, they would also set off. They would follow the planned route and head north to look for Er Dai. When Kai Yingying came back, it was already dinner time. She also brought back a piece of news: there will be a friendly match tomorrow. The group of Japanese paranormals wants to compare notes with us. Each side will send 6 people. This afternoon, several large mercenary groups almost broke their heads to fight for these 6 places. My father didn't get it, but we can all go and watch. It's good to be able to watch. Shao Qing said as she went downstairs. She guessed that 2 spots would be given to the base, and the remaining 4 would be given to the 4 large mercenary groups. How could there be any left for Kai Yingying and the rest? When Shao Qing went downstairs, she saw Fu Jingma wearing a pink apron. He was putting food on the table. When he saw Shao Qing and the rest coming down, he lowered his head shyly. You don't have to do all this, Shao Qing said calmly. The young man intertwined his fingers and said embarrassedly, I have already caused trouble for everyone by following you. How can I not do anything? Besides, I have nothing to do. If I don't do anything, I will feel anxious. Gu Panpan liked this kind of humble and low-key person. Most importantly, he was not like Yan Qiue. She quickly said, you don't have to do all this. Just rest. Our leader is a very good person. We don't ask for anything in return. Fu Jingma quickly shook his head and said softly, Sister Panpan, doing such a small thing is not tiring at all. You don't have to do so next time. Shao Qing helped Little Bun settle down and said, let's eat. I will make a pot of soup and be back soon. She was now used to making a pot of soup every morning and night. Not only was it nourishing Yan Qiue's stomach, but it was also nourishing the bodies of others. She made different kinds of soup every day. When she came back, she saw Fu Jingma sitting at the bottom. He looked very restrained. Shao Qing did not say anything. She did not plan to let Fu Jingma integrate into her small group in a short period of time. Everything depended on Er Dai. If Fu Jingma was really Er Dai's brother, everything would be fine. She did not mind taking care of one more person. If Fu Jingma was not, she did not need to cultivate any feelings for him. She could just send him away. Moreover, men were supposed to be more free and easy. Shao Qing wasn't his father or mother, so how could she teach him a lesson? After dinner, the group gathered in the hall for a while. They drank some water and chatted. Kai Yingying left early, leaving Shao Qing and Yan Hanqing to fight in the courtyard. This process did not refer to the fight between ability users. It was a physical fight. Although Yan Hanqing could not defeat Shao Qing, he did not lose to Shao Qing in terms of physical strength. After all, Yan Hanqing used to be the soldier king of his generation and was known as the Manchurian tiger in the 3 major military regions. After becoming a paranormal, his physical fitness had improved a lot. The 2 of them fought in the yard for half an hour without risking their lives, but it was still a draw. The others were watching with great interest at the door. Fu Jingma could not help but ask, Sister Qing and Brother Qing have trained before? They are very good. Gu Panpan munched on melon seeds as she gossiped with Fu Jingma. Sister Qing and Brother Qing were both from the special forces. Although they have retired from the military, their skills are definitely top-notch. And this isn't the real thing. Yan Qiue could not help but roll his eyes at Gu Panpan. You talk too much. He was not willing to listen to Fu Jingma ask about Shaoqing. Gu Panpan and Yan Qiue did not get along. The two of them were born to be at odds. Every time they met, they would quarrel. You are a trap. How dare you talk about me like that? Every time this happened, Gu Panpan hated her brother. She was angry that he did not fight for her. Look, let's not talk about Yan Qiue. She pestered Shaoqing every day. Even Yan Hanqing, that honest person, would silently make supper for Shaoqing and fight with Shaoqing. Only her brother. He did not know how to talk nonsense. He kept his thoughts to himself and kept them to himself. How could such a taciturn person get a girl? Even if he did not pester her like Yan Qiue, he should at least take action. Would a girl take the initiative to throw herself at him? Thinking about this, Gu Panpan gritted her teeth. When her brother could be more reliable and take the initiative, she would not have to worry about losing a bunch of hair every day and becoming bald. No, she was most worried that someone would take the initiative and turn her future sister-in-law into someone else's wife. If it was possible, Gu Panpan really wanted to take her brother's place and chase after Shaoqing. The two of them were like children, scolding and berating each other. The more they argued, the more addicted they became. Thus, they completely did not notice that Fu Jingma had been quietly watching Shaoqing from the side. The light in his eyes was getting more and more intense. If they found out, the two of them would definitely put aside their temporary hatred and work together against the enemy. On the other side, although Shaoqing was not sweating, she was exceptionally refreshed. She flipped her hair and tightened her loose clothes. Then, she said, let's call it a day. Yan Hanqing subconsciously glanced at her closed collar. Chapter 200. Fu Jingma was very diligent and honest. He spent the whole day either cleaning up the house or doing some trivial things. Gu Panpan and the others had a better impression of him. After all, almost no one would hate someone who was diligent and good-looking. Soon, it was time for the friendly competition. The friendly competition was held in the big square of Jingdu. Although it was open to the public, it still required ability users to enter. The seats in the front row were reserved for the more powerful mercenary groups in Jingdu. Although Kai Yingying's mercenary group wasn't in the top few, it was still a relatively large mercenary group. Naturally, they could occupy a seat. Kai Yingying had brought Shaoqing and the others early. Shaoqing also met Kai Yingying's father for the first time. Kai Yingying's father looked very kind. He had a smile on his face when he met people. He was very likable. Moreover, when Kai Yingying's father talked to Shaoqing and the others, he didn't put on airs. He didn't show any arrogance just because Shaoqing's group was a nameless team of ability users. In short, he looked quite amiable. After a while, the other top-ranked mercenary groups arrived one after another. The most eye-catching group was naturally Thorns and Roses. They were all girls, and not a single one of them was ugly. The most eye-catching of all was their leader, Wu Jiaojiao. She was wearing a tight leather suit that accentuated her figure. She had a small waist and a beautiful face. Coupled with her sexy makeup, she attracted the attention of all the metahumans present. Naturally, Shaoqing wasn't looking at the girls. Instead, she was looking at the man who was sitting in the corner. He looked quite handsome. His facial features weren't very prominent, but he was the type that was good-looking. The reason why he attracted Shaoqing's attention was that he didn't have much of a presence. Even if he was sitting in a group and dozing off, he wouldn't attract too much attention. Shaoqing took a second look. Perhaps he felt Shaoqing's gaze, so he opened his eyes. As soon as he opened his eyes, the man's whole face gave off a completely different feeling. Perhaps it was the finishing touch, but his face instantly became delicate and pretty, to the point where people couldn't take their eyes off him. Especially his eyes, which were sparkling and slightly squinted, with a faint smile on his face. Then, he met Xiao Qing's gaze. Xiao Qing sized him up very seriously, then looked away. The man was a little curious. He was very clear about his own appearance. Very few people could break away from his gaze so naturally when they looked at him in the eye. However, when Xiao Qing looked away, her eyes were full of the word boring, which made him a little discouraged. The Japanese and the higher-ups of the base came together. When the Japanese arrived, Xiao Qing almost jumped up because at the back of the Japanese team, there was a young girl in a cherry blossom kimono. Beside the young girl stood a young man with a long scar at the corner of his eye. Xiao Qing almost flew over and hugged the young man. She had searched for so long and worn out her iron shoes to no avail. However, Dai appeared in front of her by himself. That was Dai. Xiao Qing didn't need to ask or say anything. She could recognize at a glance that it was definitely Dai. Yan Hanqing also saw Dai. He grabbed Xiao Qing's hand and said in a low voice, "Don't be impulsive. Let's take a look first." Why was Dai in the Japanese team? Xiao Qing suppressed the impulse in her heart and observed carefully. She found that Dai's expression was very gloomy, with a faint sense of urgency and impatience. The scar at the corner of his eye was obviously not new, but it hadn't disappeared. More importantly, there was a chain around his wrist. The end of the chain was inside the kimono girl's wide sleeve. Chapter 201. Xiao Qing's heart was filled with killing intent. She was almost certain that Dai was coerced. Don't be rash. Yan Hanqing felt Xiao Qing's killing intent and pressed down on her shoulder. Let's observe for a while more. Judging from the situation, Dai is temporarily safe. Xiao Qing took a deep breath, suppressed the impulse in her heart, but kept looking at Dai. Dai also felt Xiao Qing's gaze. He turned his head, and when he saw Xiao Qing, his eyes were filled with surprise and grievance. After not seeing each other for such a long time, Dai had also calmed down a lot. He did not immediately show his impulsiveness, but stood there quietly. He did not make any unnecessary movements, only using his eyes to express his unhappiness and longing. Xiao Qing could clearly see that his eyes were filled with longing, so much so that it was about to overflow. Xiao Qing's heart ached. Ever since they met, they had only separated twice. The first time, she had abandoned him. The second time, she had abandoned him in disguise. This time, when they met again, Xiao Qing would never let such a thing happen again. After the Japanese had taken their seats, the two sides had a friendly exchange. Xiao Qing could understand the Japanese language, but she did not care about the small talk. Her hearing was very sensitive. She could even hear the girl in the kimono asking dummy in broken Chinese, "Do you hate this kind of scene with so many people? It'll be over in a while. How about I take you around for a walk?" Dai ignored her and tilted his head to look at the ground. The girl was not discouraged and kept whispering in Dai's ear until a man beside her said, "Your Highness Aiz, it's time to take a seat." There were not many people who could be called Your Highness, and she was also a woman. Xiao Qing immediately thought of a person, Qiu Xiao Ai, the only daughter of the current emperor of the island. Why was she in the island's envoy group? Xiao Qing could not help but frown. If this woman was really Qiu Xiaoai, it would be troublesome for her to forcefully bring her back to Dai. The requirement of a friendly match was naturally to not kill anyone. After all, it was under the banner of friendship. Of course, it was very normal to not be able to hold back during the process. Therefore, even if someone died, the two sides would not pursue the murderer's responsibility. They didn't say it out loud, but everyone knew that the first one to appear was a short man from Japan with a big head. On the other side was the vice leader of the Frost mercenary group, one of the top paranormals in Kyoto. At the beginning of the fight, Frost's vice leader had suffered a few losses. The Japanese Esper was an earth elemental. He seemed to be a ninja who was good at combining earth elemental and martial arts. If it was a fight to the death, Frost's vice leader and the earth elemental would definitely be the one to die. However, during the competition, Frost's vice leader was at a disadvantage because he was not familiar with the ninja's tactics. Unfortunately, he lost. When he lost, not only himself, but all the paranormals in Kyoto felt embarrassed. After all, this was the first round, and they lost to Japan. How embarrassing was it to lose at the beginning of the competition? Before the second round started, Wu Jiaojiao stood up and said, "I'll go this round." She had a bad temper. Without saying anything, she rolled up her sleeves and went up. As soon as Wu Jiaojiao went up, the paranormals below started cheering and whistling. Although Wu Jiaojiao had a bad temper, she was not a fire elemental. She was a water elemental. At first, people thought that water elemental paranormals were useless. Could you throw a water ball to kill a zombie? Later, the water source was gradually polluted, and the water that could be drunk directly became less and less. Water elemental paranormals became precious because they were like living water purifiers. People could go without food for a few days, but they could not go without water for a few days. Chapter 202. Although water ability users had become precious, in people's hearts, they were still auxiliary types and were only suitable to be raised in the base. Wu Jiaojiao overturned everyone's thoughts. As a water ability user, when Thorns and Roses was first established, many people had bad thoughts because Thorns and Roses was full of girls. She had once challenged 6 ability users of the same level alone and won. Similar results were not just once, and slowly built up the reputation of Thorns and Roses. It could be said that Wu Jiaojiao was the idol of all the girls in Kyoto and water ability users. Wu Jiaojiao's ability was indeed very strong. She did not give the opponent a chance to use his escape technique. The water seeped into the soil. The ability user wanted to control the soil to form an earth shield, but he realized that he could not control the soil under his feet. Then, the water curtain directly cut off all contact between the person and the outside world. Wu Jiaojiao lit a cigarette and lazily watched the water curtain shrink bit by bit. Finally, it wrapped around the shape of a person. The Japanese yin-yang master shouted, "We admit defeat." His Chinese was very authentic and there was nothing strange about it. Wu Jiaojiao narrowed her eyes and blew out a smoke ring. Secretly, she suddenly tightened the water curtain. Then, when her water curtain dispersed, there was only a dead person left on the ground. "Ayaya, I'm sorry. I was shocked and used too much strength." Wu Jiaojiao patted her 36D and said with a delicate face. Those who were familiar with her wanted to spit on her. She had a bad temper and was delicate, but now, everyone only wanted to kiss her. She had given face to her countrymen and vented her anger. The yin-yang master's expression did not change. He only called his subordinates over and then collected the corpse of the dead person. He did not seem angry. He politely called for the next person to come out. The person who came out was the warrior with the bun. Xiao Qin knew at a glance that he was actually angry because this bun was not simple. The moment the bun stood out, a person walked out from the Mad Demon mercenary group. Usually, the leader of such a large mercenary group would not easily make a move, except for Wu Jiaojiao's temper. The Mad Demon mercenary group's deputy leader was also on par with the leader. When the two of them started fighting, Xiao Qin sighed. She could tell that the vice leader of Mad Devil was no match for the girl with the bun. As she expected, the first half of the fight seemed to be a tie. However, Xiao Qin could clearly see that the girl with the bun only used 50% of her strength, while the vice leader of Mad Devil was already using his full strength. In the second half of the fight, the bun had suddenly increased her strength. Mad Devil's leader didn't even have time to admit defeat before the vice leader was cut in half. It was split in the middle. Judging from the size, the two halves were of the same size. Blood and internal organs flowed all over the floor. The girl with the bun probably did it on purpose to make the scene so bloody as revenge for Wu Jiaojiao's attack. His arrival infuriated the other commanders, especially the commander of Mad Demon. After all, he had lost one of his experts. Without a second thought, he jumped up and wanted to take revenge. However, he was pulled back because they had discussed it very clearly at that time. 2 of the spots belonged to the base, and the remaining spots would be given to each of the 4 mercenary groups. The few of them looked at the drowsy man in the corner. He was the only one left among the 4 mercenary groups who had not made a move. The man was still dozing off, but he almost shivered when he was stared at by the group of people. He rubbed his eyes, stretched, and stood in front of them. "Is it my turn?" A few people dragged the bloody corpse past him. Only then did he sniff and wake up a little. He glanced around and asked, "It's my turn, right?" Chapter 203. The few of them nodded helplessly. The man asked, "Who's going to fight me?" The man with the bun raised his head proudly and stabbed the bloody katana into the ground. "I'll continue." "No problem." His words were clear. It was no problem for him to deal with several people by himself. This was simply showing off. The man was not angry. He blinked and said, "Then can we start now?" The man with the bun nodded. The man immediately raised his hand, and 6 arm-length short knives immediately flew towards the man with the bun. As soon as the short knives flew over, the man with the bun vigilantly erected a fire shield for himself and prepared to block. However, the 6 knives stabbed into the ground beside his feet, forming an irregular hexagon. The man with the bun couldn't help but laugh. Wasn't this person's control too bad? How did he become the representative of the Celestial Empire? Was there no one else in the Celestial Empire? Without waiting for him to finish laughing, the man suddenly pressed his palm down. The rumbling sound of the explosion was almost deafening. Broken soil splattered everywhere, and half of an arm with a katana fell on the table in front of the Japanese representative. After the explosion stopped, the place where the man with the bun was originally standing had turned into a huge pit. Beside the pit were pieces of limbs that were scattered all over the place. If the vice captain of Mad Demon had died miserably, then this man with the bun was a tragic sight. At least the vice captain of Mad Demon had an intact corpse. Even if he was cut in half, he could still bury them together. What about the one in front of him? He couldn't even bury them together. The man brushed his bangs and said perfunctorily, "I thought he was very powerful, so I used more strength." Who would have thought that he wouldn't be able to withstand the first move? "This has nothing to do with me." The man with the bun had only been pretending for 2 minutes before his face was slapped back. Moreover, his entire body was smashed into pieces. More importantly, the man stood there and didn't intend to go down. "Then, one more of you can come up. I think that with this level, I can take on the entire field alone." Kai Ying laughed from below. "He's too proud of us. He has to slap our faces like this. As expected of the leader of the Dark Thorn. I've decided. In the future, my Prince Charming will be Zhu Machin, and my goddess will be Wu Jiaojiao." In the end, the man called Zhu Machin was unable to continue slapping his face because he was dragged away by his vice captain. The Onmyoji sitting at the very front unfolded his clothes and said humbly, "It's said that the Celestial Empire is vast and full of talents. It really lives up to its reputation. I'll take on the remaining 2 matches. Being able to spar with a few experts makes this trip worth it." Naturally, no one would say anything if he wanted to take on 2 matches. This was his ability. If he didn't have the ability and dared to say such big words, he could only be slapped in the face. A young man walked out from the higher-ups of the base and got into position to spar with the Onmyoji. The two of them exchanged names, and Xiao Qin learned that the Onmyoji was called Abe Shizuke. He was wearing a kimono and didn't carry any weapons. He only had a fan in his hand, which had words that even Xiao Qin couldn't understand. He stood in the middle of the field, and his aura was very calm. However, the paranormals on the base could not help but feel nervous. There were already thin energy fluctuations emanating from his body. However, in comparison, he was not as good as Abe Shigeki. Is he related to Abe Saimai? Gu Panpan bit her finger and asked in a low voice. If one were to ask about Japan's Onmyoji, the most famous one would definitely be Abe Saimai. Abe Shizuke just happened to have the same surname as Abe Saimai, which made Gu Panpan curious. Abe Saimai's branch of the Onmyoji lineage had a gap and directly died out. The last Onmyoji of the Abe family had a female disciple. After the Abe family's bloodline died out, she gave birth to a child with her husband and let the child take on the surname Abe. Abe Shizuke should belong to this branch. Xiao Qin explained seriously. However, Gu Panpan would probably treat it as gossip. If it weren't for the arrival of the apocalypse and the appearance of zombies, paranormals, and those mutated animals and plants, Gu Panpan would definitely think that the Onmyoji were also a legendary existence. The Onmyoji called Abe Shizuke bowed politely and began to move. When he moved, it was impossible to tell what kind of paranormal he was. This was because no matter if the paranormals on the base released fire blades or fireballs, he would use the fan in his hand to easily block them. His other hand was always behind his back. This kind of attitude was really too arrogant. The paranormals gradually became angry. He pushed Abe Shizuke away with a ring of fire. Then, he used nearly 3 seconds to condense his power. Finally, a ring of red light suddenly appeared under Abe Shizuke's feet. Scorching flames erupted like a volcano and drowned Abe Shizuke. The moment Shiroyuki Abe was submerged, many people breathed a sigh of relief. However, Xiao Qin's heart skipped a beat because she saw the space behind the Esper from the base suddenly fluctuate, and then a figure appeared. This figure was none other than Abe Shizuke, who had just been submerged. He raised his folding fan and 3 green lights formed a diamond-shaped light blade and stabbed towards the paranormal's back. This was clearly a wind blade. Teleportation should belong to the space element, and wind blade should belong to the wind element. Could it be that he was a dual-element paranormals? Xiao Qin could be considered a dual-element paranormals now. In addition to the wood element that she completely controlled, Xiao Qin also comprehended some space abilities. Although she was still not proficient in using space, she only lacked time. If she was allowed to become a dual-element paranormals, why couldn't others be allowed to do the same? However, Abe Shizuke quickly changed her view because the paranormals from the base weren't weak. After sensing the killing intent, he rolled forward and dodged the wind blade. At this time, Abe Shizuke stretched out his hand and a vine drilled out from the ground, trying to bind the paranormal's ankles. Triple element. Chapter 204. Vine, Fireball, Earth Shield. Shizuyuki Abe used 5 different abilities in succession, which made the jaws of the onlookers drop to the ground. How to describe it? For an ordinary person to become an ability user, it was already a great fortune, but Shizuyuki Abe actually had 5 different abilities. This discovery made the paranormal from the base a little flustered. He had a preconceived notion that he would lose. In the end, he was knocked out of the field by Shiroyuki Abe's folding fan. Although Shiroyuki Abe's movements were very elegant, when the paranormal left the field, he spat out a mouthful of blood. His face instantly turned pale. His internal organs were injured. If he didn't take a good rest, it would be a big hindrance to his future promotion. More importantly, after this paranormal left the field, the base couldn't send out a second person to compete with Shiroyuki Abe. It wasn't that there was no one in the base, but that no one thought that they could beat the paranormal who lost. If they lost this last round, they would lose a lot of face in this friendly competition. However, in this situation, no one dared to say that they could beat Abe Shizuke. He had already displayed 5 types of abilities. Looking at how skillful he was, who knew if he still had other tricks up his sleeves? The field suddenly fell into a deadlock. Some people were eager to try, but no one dared to stand out and try. A few of the stronger paranormal, such as Wu Jiaojiao, had already fought before. If they fought again, wouldn't people say that there was no one in the Celestial Empire? Xiao Qing sat quietly. She had the urge to go down and try, but she didn't want to expose herself. Although strength could be used as a deterrent, she didn't have any great power, so there was no need for that. Now, the biggest problem Xiao Qing was facing was actually Air Dai. Instead of showing off, it was better to think about how to rescue Air Dai without anyone knowing. In fact, she had another choice, which was to ambush Shiroyuki Abe and Shiroyuki Abe when they left Kyoto and rescue Air Dai by force. However, a long delay could lead to many problems. Xiao Qing was afraid that something would happen during this period. She didn't want to see any damage to Air Dai, so it was better to save Air Dai as soon as possible. Xiao Qing gritted her teeth and suddenly stood up. She spoke in fluent Japanese. "Mr. Onmyoji, I would like to experience your ability. But before that, I have something to discuss with you." When she stood up, Xiao Qing had already made up her mind. The worst-case scenario was that she would forcefully take Air Dai away. If anyone tried to stop them, it would definitely be the Japanese. Killing them would not be a pity. Instead, it would be quite satisfying. The worst thing she could do was to launch a zombie siege. So what if she had to go against the entire human race? As long as the people she cared about were fine, that was enough. "May I know what this beautiful young lady wants to discuss with me?" Abe Shizuke elegantly listened to her. Xiao Qing pointed at Air Dai and said, "The young man over there is my relative. He was accidentally lost. I don't know what happened to him. He will be in your team. I hope you can bring him back." Qiu Xiao and Izzy said without thinking, "That's not possible." But soon, she seemed to think of something. After all, such a decisive refusal, and the other party was Air Dai's relative, sounded a little unreasonable. It was not an enemy, but a relative who wanted to reunite with Air Dai. Wasn't it cold-blooded for her to refuse? Qiu Xiao Izzy bit her lower lip and couldn't help but look at Air Dai. Air Dai didn't look to the side or the ground as usual. Instead, he looked at Xiao Qing with a warm and gentle gaze that she had never seen before. Chapter 205. At that moment, Qiu Xiao Izzy knew that what Xiao Qing said was true. Qiu Xiao Izzy's nose twitched, and she felt a little sad. The first time she saw Air Dai, she sneaked out and encountered a mutant beast. Air Dai happened to pass by. He was in a hurry to run south, but when he saw the group of mutant beasts, he turned around. He was a little injured in the midst of a group of mutant beasts. He looked very fierce. Qiu Xiao Izzy felt that she was like a princess who had been saved by a hero. Her heart was full of indescribable feelings. Of course, that was because Qiu Xiao Izzy didn't know that Air Dai just wanted to get some high-grade crystals and bring them back to Xiao Qing. Later, Abe and Shizuyuki came. There was a communication barrier between the two sides, and Air Dai was hot-tempered. As a result, there was a conflict. Air Dai certainly couldn't beat so many paranormals. Besides, he had a lot of secrets that he couldn't show to others. Therefore, Air Dai was caught. Naturally, Qiu Xiao Izzy was reluctant to let Air Dai become a prisoner. In her heart, Air Dai was the hero who saved her. However, Air Dai went crazy once and tried to leave several times, so she had to trap Air Dai. Now, the person that Air Dai really cared about was here. She wanted to trap Air Dai, but she had no excuse. Even so, Xiaoizi still didn't want to hand over air dye so easily. She pretended to be spoiled and said, "If you can defeat Shizuyuki, then I will give him to you. If you lose, I won't give him to you." Xiao Qing's original plan was to avoid using force as much as possible, but with the situation in front of her, it was impossible not to use force. She calmly said, "Then please enlighten me, Yin-Yang Master." Xiao Qing's approach was actually very abrupt. After all, the people present were all famous paranormals in Kyoto, and she was not famous at all. Speaking of which, she was not qualified to stand up or even speak. Therefore, a few superpowered people who thought they were smart immediately stood up to stop her. "If you're not capable enough, don't come out and embarrass yourself. This is not your home." Xiao Qing didn't even look at them and walked straight ahead. The paranormals didn't even have a chance to fight back. They only felt as if they were pushed away by an invisible hand. They couldn't even get close to Xiao Qing. The other people who had objections also stopped talking at this moment. The higher-ups looked at each other and finally acquiesced. Anyway, no one stood out now, and Xiao Qing seemed to have some ability. More importantly, Xiao Qing was just a nobody. Even if she lost, it wouldn't be too embarrassing. Xiao Qing stood in the middle of the field. The two of them faced each other, and the atmosphere was completely different. If Abe Shizuyuki gave people the feeling of a harmonious spring breeze with hidden killing intent, then Xiao Qing was a pool of still water. She looked calm without waves, but no one knew what kind of undercurrent was surging underneath. The two of them stood in the middle and didn't immediately start fighting. Instead, they chatted for a while. The first to speak was Abe Shizuyuki. He suddenly said, "In your language, Miss, you look very familiar. Have we met before?" Xiao Qing shook her head. "Probably because I look more ordinary, I haven't met a Yin-Yang master before. I like opponents like you, Miss. This one is Abe Shizuyuki." Abe Shizuyuki introduced himself very seriously. "Currently, I'm the current Shushin Gong guardian." The Shushin Gong was Abe Saimai's ancestral temple. The previous Shushin Gong must have been a Japanese astronomer who was best at divination. The astronomer here wasn't a degree, but a special existence in Japan. It was a very important position in the Yin-Yang Liao. Abe Shizuyuki didn't mention his position, but his inheritance. This showed that he actually valued Xiao Qing very much. Chapter 206. Although Xiao Qing didn't have much contact with it, she had heard of it. Just like there were Onmyoji warriors in Japan, there were also ancient martial arts passed down from generation to generation in the Celestial Empire. Although it wasn't as powerful as in novels and TV shows, it was far superior to things like Muay Thai, Sanda, and Judo. She was afraid that Abe Shizuka would misunderstand her as a descendant of ancient martial arts. Xiao Qing wasn't prepared to explain. She said lightly, "Xiao Qing." Then she was ready to attack. Even in front of so many people, she wasn't going to hold back anymore, because nothing was more important than air dye. She had to win this battle. "Please." Abe Shizuka still stretched out his hand politely, and his wide sleeves hung down naturally. Suddenly, a breeze blew, and his sleeves moved slightly. It wasn't the wind, but Xiao Qing's vines broke out of the ground, causing the air to flow. Countless vines were like sharp spears, stabbing at the soles of Abe Shizuka's feet. He stroked his hand down, and flames spewed out. Xiao Qing's vines weren't afraid of fire, but Abe Shizuka's flames still blocked the vines for a moment. At this moment, Abe Shizuka used the recoil force to temporarily float in the air for a moment. In the next second, countless air currents carried him away from the vines soaring into the sky. Xiao Qing had already appeared beside Abe Shizuka at this time, and a solid punch landed on Abe Shizuka's body. A layer of water suddenly appeared on Abe Shizuka's body. The power of the water circle was very soft, but it pushed Xiao Qing nearly a meter away, and the distance between them immediately increased. But when Xiaoqing and Abe Shizuka's water circle came into contact, she felt that something was wrong. The feeling that the water circle gave her wasn't like a pure water ability. With this doubt, Xiaoqing commanded the vines to harass Abe Shizuka, and she once again launched an attack on Abe Shizuka's body. Several times in a row, she deliberately used her body to block Abe Shizuka's attacks. In the eyes of outsiders, it looked like she was being attacked continuously and was about to lose, but she was very happy. This was because she had discovered Shiroyuki Abe's secret. Shiroyuki Abe was not a multi-elemental esper. After all, having 2 elemental espers was already very powerful, and having 3 elemental espers was even more heaven-defying. Xiaoqing first noticed that all of Abe Shizuka's ability attacks had similar energy fluctuations. Although the water ability was no different from the general water ability, it didn't have the unique characteristics of water. To put it simply, his special ability was only on the surface, but it did not have the most important part, such as the heat of the flames and the vitality of the wood element. In that case, Shiroyuki Abe should have a special ability to assimilate her own energy into various types of abilities. After discovering this, Xiaoqing was very steady. She fought steadily, harassing with vines while constantly releasing daughter seeds. The daughter seeds were all attached to the surface of Abe Shizuka's body. They didn't penetrate deeply, and then silently absorbed his energy. Abilities weren't endless. Sooner or later, they would be exhausted. Xiaoqing had brought this time forward. To be honest, Xiaoqing's various abilities were more suitable for chaotic situations. She would be at a disadvantage if she fought alone. However, Xiaoqing was extremely calm. She continuously probed Abe Shizuka, and then discovered that Abe Shizuka's ability wasn't very destructive. At least compared to Zhu Machen's metal that could explode, or her poisonous vines with thorns, it was a bit less destructive. Of course, the most important thing was that Xiaoqing wanted to analyze Abe Shizuka's weakness. She continuously fought, and only used her vines to harass Abe Shizuka and observe his condition. Chapter 207. She had more energy than the average ability user. Shiroyuki Abe's level was not higher than hers, so normally speaking, his energy was not as good as Xiaoqing's. Just as Xiaoqing expected, after a long time, Shiroyuki Abe suddenly paused for a moment. This was a sign that there was a momentary break in the energy supply. Xiaoqing immediately launched an attack. The first thing she did was to tear open space. The so-called teleportation was actually breaking the barrier between 2 spaces and then going from one position to another. For example, Xiaoqing went from where she was standing to directly behind Shiroyuki Abe. To Xiaoqing's surprise, Shiroyuki Abe also disappeared. He actually appeared where Xiaoqing was. In other words, both of them had the ability to teleport. They wanted to sneak attack each other at the same time, so they appeared behind each other's original position at the same time. Thus, no one could sneak attack the other. This was simply a huge coincidence. After this, it would be much more difficult to use a similar method to sneak attack. After all, the other party was already prepared. Xiaoqing was not willing to take risks regarding air dye. She would rather fight steadily and spend more time grinding with Shiroyuki Abe. Thus, the situation in the field was like this. You throw a fireball or something, I use a vine shield to block it. My vines fly over, you use the wind to help yourself dodge. Not to mention the spectators, even Gu Pan Pan and the others were starting to feel a little tired. This should be the longest battle this time, and it seemed like no one would be able to do anything to the other in such a short period of time. The results were about to come out, they would probably have to wait for half a day. Shiroyuki Abe was also very clear about Xiaoqing's thoughts. After all, she wanted to fight a war of attrition. As long as one was not stupid, one could tell. However, Abe Shizuku couldn't do anything to Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing was more slippery than anyone else. He couldn't trap Xiaoqing at all, let alone defeat her. As a result, the two of them could exhaust each other, and when they were almost exhausted, they would start to fight. Their abilities were purely used as support, and when it came to fighting, Shiroyuki Abe was no match for Xiaoqing. To put it bluntly, Xiaoqing had been through hundreds of battles, and she was incomparably proficient in fighting before the apocalypse. But Shiroyuki Abe? His status was very high, and he didn't need to do anything himself, let alone fight. Who would dare to offend him? As a result, it became Xiaoqing beating up Shiroyuki Abe, and Shiroyuki Abe could only rely on his dodging technique to escape. Originally, when the spectators saw Xiaoqing getting beaten up in the first half of the battle, their morale was very low. Some people even lowered their heads, unwilling to watch the result. After all, it was really embarrassing to be slapped in the face by a Japanese. As a result, the situation in the second half of the battle suddenly changed. Xiaoqing began to chase after Abe Shizuku. At this time, the two of them were in a very sorry state. After all, Xiaoqing's body was very strong, but her clothes were still ordinary clothes. Her clothes were torn, faintly revealing pieces of white skin. Abe Shizuku was also in a very sorry state, and the corner of his mouth was bruised. Then, Shiroyuki Abe became angry. He had never been forced to such a state before. Shiroyuki Abe's hands formed a complicated seal, and suddenly, a huge earth-colored snake rose from the bottom of his feet. The earth python looked to be more than 2 meters tall, and Shiroyuki Abe stood on its head. However, the bottom of his feet was supported by wind energy, so he didn't land on solid ground. When he used this move, many people began to cry out in surprise. To be able to condense earth energy into such a huge python, and it was so lifelike, as if it was a living creature, it should be at least level 4, right? Xiaoqing frowned slightly. With a wave of her hand, a huge dragon made entirely of vines rose into the air and lifted her up. The two of them stood on the head of the python and rode on the dragon. Just looking at the scene, it was more shocking than the previous metahumans. Shiroyuki Abe pointed with his finger, and the python under his feet roared and rushed towards Xiaoqing. The dragon under Xiaoqing's feet also rushed forward, unwilling to be left behind. The earth python and the wood dragon intertwined in the air. You twist my tail, I wrap around your neck. It looked like they were evenly matched. As long as one side suddenly lost, that person would lose. Shiroyuki Abe also understood this logic. He folded his hands in his sleeves and looked at the dragon and snake with a cold gaze. His face was already pale because of the overdraft of his ability. Soon, his face became even paler because Xiaoqing didn't just watch. She jumped up and landed on the python's head like a rock. With a punch, a crack immediately appeared on the python's head. After a few punches, the python's head caved in. If this continued, his python would die. No one had forced him to this point. Shiroyuki Abe quietly formed a second seal. In the entire island, he was also one of the top metahumans. It wasn't because his ability was outstanding. On the contrary, his ability was remote and not outstanding. It was a simulation. However, Shiroyuki Abe was the first person to combine yin-yang technique and his ability. After he chanted a few strange syllables, the earth python suddenly straightened its head. Starting from the top, it instantly turned dark green. Even the scales on its body became lifelike. In the next second, the giant python opened its bloody mouth and bit the wood dragon's head. Then, it swung its head and slammed Xiaoqing to the ground. How hard was Xiaoqing's body? She smashed a big hole in the ground. If an ordinary metahuman was in such a situation, not to mention broken bones, at least they wouldn't be able to get up. Many people were very nervous. They looked at the big hole and soon saw Xiaoqing climb out. Yes, she crawled out. Her clothes were ragged and her hair was covered in dirt. She looked a little ridiculous, but no one laughed out loud because Xiaoqing stood up. Her left elbow was fractured, and the broken bone had pierced through her skin and flesh, exposing her arm. Xiao Qing used her right hand to hold her left hand. With a fierce twist, her arm was righted. There wasn't even a trace of pain on her face. She calmly looked at Shiroyuki Abe and the big snake. She said that she wouldn't hold back this time. Chapter 208. No matter how strong Abe Shizuyuki was, after fighting for more than an hour, his power was almost exhausted. Besides, the intensity of the battle between the two of them was especially high. Xiao Qing moved her hands and feet, and the broken parts began to slowly heal. Only then did she walk forward. At this moment, in Abe Shizuyuki's eyes, Xiao Qing's eyes seemed to be emitting a silver-white light. It was very weak, but it was impossible to ignore. Abe Shizuyuki took a deep breath and pointed forward again. The silver-white, lifelike snake rushed out. The vines that soared into the sky immediately wrapped around the snake. Naturally, no one saw the black cracks between the vines. The vines entangled and twisted, and the snake turned into a pile of dirt. Abe Shizuyuki was stunned. He didn't expect the snake to be so weak. While he was in a daze, a spatial crack quietly appeared behind him. It quickly cut open a wound and then disappeared. If it was just that, it wouldn't be much. However, Abe Shizuyuki felt something enter the wound and grow unscrupulously in his body. Abe Shizuyuki instantly broke out in cold sweat. He used all his power to suppress the daughter in his body. Xiao Qing walked over step by step. Abe Shizuyuki knew that he had lost. If he wanted to fight, he wouldn't be able to suppress the daughter and would die. However, all his power was used to suppress the daughter. How could he block Xiao Qing's attack? I admit defeat. As soon as Abe Shizuyuki's voice fell, he felt the crazily growing thing in his body wither and shrink in an instant. Then, it couldn't be found. Xiao Qing wiped the dust off her face. She looked past Abe Shizuyuki and looked at Dai. Her eyes were filled with gentleness as she walked over. Dai pounced over without saying a word, but there was a long chain locking him up. Xiao Qing's eyes flashed with a cold light. Without saying a word, she grabbed the chain. Her palm surged with the power of space and directly cut the chain. Dai smoothly threw himself into her arms and didn't go out. He had a lot of grievances and thoughts that he wanted to tell Xiao Qing, but he couldn't. The only way to express his feelings was to hug Xiao Qing tightly. Xiao Qing had been feeling very frustrated these days, but at this moment, she was completely relaxed. Xiao Qing didn't say a word and carried Dai back. She didn't even look at those island people, and naturally, she didn't notice the jealousy in Xiao Zhao's eyes. Yan Hanqing and the others had been waiting for a long time. When they saw Dai, they felt very happy. After all, they were a team, and Dai was also an important member of them. When Dai came back, the feeling of missing something was gone. To be honest, this battle wasn't as exciting as the previous few battles. Moreover, it had lasted for a long time, but no one was sleepy. Everyone's eyes were wide open, afraid that they would miss something. Xiao Qing didn't have any reputation in the capital. Of course, that was in the past. After today, she would definitely be included in the list of experts in the capital. Xiao Qing wasn't someone who liked to be in the limelight. As soon as she returned to her seat, she said to Cai Yingying, "We're really leaving this time. Let's meet again if we have the chance." Cai Yingying was also very desperate now. She carefully compared and found that in terms of appearance, she was not as good as Xiao Qing. In terms of strength, she was not as good as Xiao Qing. In terms of background, her father was a little more powerful, but he was not as powerful as Xiao Qing. More importantly, Yan Qiue had never looked at her. The girl was also a bit tactful. She immediately suppressed the sadness in her heart and nodded. She also helped to stop Cai Yingying's father, who wanted to talk to Xiao Qing in detail. Xiao Qing quietly slipped away with her people. If she didn't leave now, would she wait for this friendship competition to end and then be taken over by others? Chapter 209. Most of the paranormals present, especially the leaders of the mercenary groups, had the same idea. Take Mr. Kai as an example. Xiao Qing was a level 4 paranormal, and one of the strongest among level 4 paranormals. If he could get Xiao Qing to join his mercenary group and make her the vice leader, his mercenary group would become the 5th strongest mercenary group after the top 4 mercenary groups as long as Xiao Qing agreed to stay. He was not the only one with such ambition. There must be countless people who wanted to rope in Xiao Qing. If Xiao Qing didn't run away quickly, she would be harassed every day and would want to destroy the world. Therefore, Xiao Qing was smart enough to take Dai and the others out of Jingdu directly. When those paranormals realized what was going on, they were already gone. Xiao Qing was already outside Jingdu. She took her friends and ran all the way until they were far away from Jingdu. It was already noon. Yan Hanqing took Xiao Qing's place to cook, leaving Xiao Qing and Dai to sit together. Even Yan Hanqing reluctantly left some space for them. Dai hugged Xiao Qing and didn't want to let go. He kept rubbing against Xiao Qing's body. Xiao Qing tried to push him away, but he looked like he was wronged. Xiao Qing had no choice but to hold Dai in her arms again. Logically speaking, Dai was a zombie, and his body shape would not change. However, Xiao Qing felt that her Dai was thinner. When she held him, he was more painful than before. She pinched Dai's chin and looked at him carefully. The scar at the corner of his eye was not deep, but it could not be removed. Judging from the scar, it should be cut by something sharp. Even a zombie's constitution could not remove the scar. Xiao Qing rubbed it with her fingers. The scar wasn't deep, but it was painful. Dai immediately put his face in front of Xiao Qing. He wanted a kiss. Xiao Qing smiled helplessly and gently kissed Dai's eye. Okay. How old are you? Why are you still acting like a spoiled child? Oh right, I want to show you someone. Then, she called Fu Jingma over. Fu Jingma was silent all the way until Xiao Qing called him over. When Fu Jingma saw Dai, his eyes became wet. He rushed forward and tried to hug Dai. However, Dai moved his butt and stuffed himself into Xiao Qing's arms. So, Fu Jingma didn't. He didn't feel awkward. Instead, he said with reddened eyes, "Ah Shen, I'm your older brother. Don't you recognize me?" Dai looked at him curiously. His bright eyes were filled with confusion. In the end, he couldn't even be bothered to look at him. He stuffed his face into Xiao Qing's arms and rubbed against it. Fu Jingma couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. He fell to the ground and asked softly, "How did this happen? I'm sure he's my younger brother, but he doesn't seem to recognize me." Xiao Qing stood up and looked down at Fu Jingma. Her expression was unreadable. She asked, "I'll ask you 2 questions. First, are you sure Dai is your younger brother? Second, are you willing to do anything for your younger brother?" Fu Jingma gritted his teeth and said, "He's definitely my younger brother. I let him down in the past. I didn't take good care of him. I owe him. Now that we're finally reunited, I'll do anything for my younger brother." "Oh." Xiao Qing bent down. "Can I do anything?" Fu Jingma nodded and looked at Xiao Qing seriously. Dai, who was clinging on to Xiao Qing, immediately stretched his head out. He suddenly opened his mouth and revealed his sharp fangs. His eyes were dark red as if they were stained with blood. His face instantly became ferocious and scary. Not to mention his older brother, even his biological parents would be frightened if they saw this scene. Especially with Xiao Qing as a comparison. One had clear eyes and a beautiful face, while the other had a ferocious look with fangs that gleamed coldly. Even though these two faces were clearly conflicting, when put together, they were unexpectedly harmonious. Chapter 210. Fu Jingma, on the other hand, was not afraid at all. He was very calm. Xiao Qing stroked Dai's head. When she looked at Fu Jingma again, her eyes were filled with malice. Is it okay to be eaten up? Fu Jingma bit his lower lip tightly. His voice was a little nervous and hoarse, but he said very firmly, if my younger brother needs it, it's okay to do anything. Dai slowly inched closer to Fu Jingma. Fu Jingma could even feel Dai's cold breath on his neck. That area of skin gave him goosebumps. Fu Jingma gritted his teeth and did not move. When Dai was almost touching him, Xiao Qing hugged Dai and said calmly, since you are Dai's older brother and now that you know this big secret, you can't leave even if you want to. Remember, if you want to escape and tell everyone what you saw today, I will kill you before you can say anything. In order to prevent Fu Jingma from revealing Dai's secret, Xiao Qing even planted a daughter seed in him. Even if he was Dai's older brother, she still had to be cautious. She had to leave a way out for herself. She would wait until she could really trust Fu Jingma after interacting with him for a long time. Only then would she remove the seed in his body. Fu Jingma did not say anything. He just stood up silently and patted the dust off his body. Then, he asked softly, can I stay with my younger brother at night? We haven't seen each other for a long time. I want to be closer to him. Dai immediately hugged Xiao Qing's neck tightly and glared fiercely at Fu Jingma. He did not like Fu Jingma, and he hated even more that Fu Jingma actually wanted to separate him and Xiao Qing. As for brothers, could he eat them? He only wanted Xiao Qing, and that was enough. Moreover, Dummy was rejecting Fu Jingma from the bottom of his heart. He didn't like him, and he hated Fu Jingma getting close to Xiao Qing. Xiao Qing comforted Dai and said, Dai doesn't know you now. If you two stay together and Dai goes crazy, you won't be able to handle it. So, let's wait until Dai is willing to acknowledge you. Fu Jingma looked down, seemingly a little disappointed. Xiao Qing brought Dai, who was like an octopus, to the place where Yan Hanqing was cooking. The table was already set up on the other side. Probably because he had been away from Xiao Qing for too long, Dai was even more clingy to Xiao Qing than before. He could not wait to occupy Xiao Qing's body all the time. His behavior provoked many people, especially Yan Qiue. If he had not been suppressing his anger and jealousy, he would have already pounced on Xiao Qing and occupied the other half of her body. Even though he was suppressing it, when Yan Qiue sat at the side, he kept looking at Xiao Qing and a certain part of her body with hidden bitterness. Yan Qiue actually had a personality flaw. If he was allowed to develop, it was very likely that he would become the final boss of the story, just like in some novels. Hence, Xiao Qing could be considered to have gotten rid of the evil in advance. However, even though Yan Qiue's personality had been restrained because of Xiao Qing, he was still a very extreme person. For example, now, when he looked at Xiao Qing and Dai, he began to think of two ways to deal with them. He could either find a way to turn Xiao Qing into a normal person, or he could find a way to turn him into the same kind of person as Xiao Qing. In short, when he saw that Dai, as the same kind of person as Xiao Qing, was able to receive so much care from Xiao Qing, he wanted to bite the corner of the blanket and cry for a while. Ever since he found Dai, Xiao Qing did not look at him again. A great enemy. Xiao Qing comforted Dai for a long time before suddenly asking Yan Qiue, can you think of a way to make food that zombies can eat? Chapter 211. She, Little Bun, and Dai were all similar to zombies. Little Bun was better, he could absorb food like milk, but she and Dai vomited everything they ate. Let me try. Yen Chiue was excited for a second, and then she said in a reserved manner, zombies absorb energy from flesh and crystals to maintain their lives and upgrade. I will study more on crystals and the flesh of mutant animals and see if I can make something. Xiao Qing nodded. At this time, Yan Hanqing had already prepared lunch. Fu Jingma took the initiative to help and put the dishes on the table. The group was ready to eat. Fu Jingma didn't think so in the past. After all, Xiao Qing had always been eating because Kai Yingying and the others were by her side. She would vomit after the deed was done. Now that there were no outsiders by her side, Xiao Qing didn't even eat. The more Fu Jingma thought about it, the more frightened he became. Was Xiao Qing also a zombie? But even if zombies were different, at most, they would be like air dye, right? Their IQ was like a child's, and they couldn't speak. If Xiao Qing was also a zombie, then it was too scary. Thinking of this, Fu Jingma threw this idea to the back of his mind. During lunch, Xiao Qing and the others were discussing, should we go back to the S-City survivor base first? Or should we go to Jiangbei to report that we are safe? We can go to Jiangbei to report that we are safe. Let's go back to S-City. We haven't been back for so long, and it won't be good if the turtledove occupies the magpie's nest. Gu Panpan said while biting her chopsticks. She had encountered this before when she went on a mission with her brother. After fighting outside for more than half a month, they came back and found that their house had been occupied. This kind of situation was common in the base. Most of the time, a group of paranormals would go out together and come back to divide the spoils of War of the Dead paranormals. Some paranormals with bad character would even go to the houses of the dead paranormals and loot them clean. Taking other people's wives and daughters had happened before. From this, it could be seen that it was a wise choice to find a group of reliable teammates. Although the base had tacitly agreed that those people could plunder the property of the dead paranormals, there were still many people who wanted to plunder the property of those who were still alive and hadn't returned for a long time. If Xiao Qing and the others were unlucky, it was very likely that they would encounter such people. This was also the reason why many paranormal teams liked to leave one person at home to guard when they were out on a mission. When Xiao Qing left, she took away most of the important things, such as the crystal stones that she had saved. However, there were still a lot of food that was not easy to bring out, so she stored them at home. If they were plundered, it would be infuriating. They were full of worries when they came, but now that they were all gone, their moods were naturally much better. The group of people walked back as if they were on a scenic tour. Occasionally, they would go out to hunt for wild animals for a sumptuous meal. At this time, it was rare to see animals that were not mutated. After all, nature was a very cruel place. Survival of the fittest was the law of the jungle. Those animals that were not mutated had been hunted and eaten in the early days of the doomsday, or were eaten by natural enemies. Some of the lucky survivors were gradually eliminated because of their weak physique. Now, almost all of the remaining animals were mutated. Mutation was a disaster for humans, but for animals, it was a carnival. Mutant animals of the same level could crush zombies, and in terms of strength, they could also crush paranormals of the same level. However, the intelligence of humans was beyond the reach of animals. Therefore, when paranormals of the same level fought with mutant animals, the outcome was not certain. What was even more terrible was that the evolution speed of mutated animals was faster than that of humans. Even zombies' evolution speed was a little faster than humans. There were 3 ways for human paranormals to evolve. The first was to exercise by themselves, which was the slowest way. The second was to absorb crystal stones, which was the most common way. The third was to absorb crystal nuclei, which was the fastest way. The crystal nuclei of the same type brought about the greatest progress for paranormals of the same type. However, humans were always bound by morality and bottom lines. Some people would secretly hunt and kill their own kind, but after all, they were a minority. Mutated animals and zombies could eat their own kind without any scruples. Therefore, their evolution was higher than that of humans. It was said that the highest level of mutated animals that had appeared so far was level 5. As for zombies, there were no rumors about them. Chapter 212. Shao Qing and the others caught some mutant animals for food and went back smoothly. At this time, Shao Qing naturally didn't know that the whole Jingdu was in chaos because of her, especially a certain acquaintance. He was in disbelief the whole time until Shao Qing left. On the way back, the whole team was in turmoil. It was night time, so those who needed to sleep naturally had to sleep. There were 4 tents in total. Shao Qing and Little Bun shared one, Gu Panpan and Shao Tong shared one, and the rest of the men were divided among themselves. But Dumbo threw himself at Shao Qing without saying a word and hung himself on Shao Qing. Yan Qiue, who was originally quite reserved, also threw herself at Shao Qing and hung herself on the other side. If Shao Qing wasn't a zombie and was stronger than ordinary people with superpowers, the 2 men would have fallen to the ground. "What are you 2 doing?" Shao Qing said helplessly. Dai didn't know how to speak, so he stared at Shao Qing with pitiful eyes. His eyes were full of, "We have been separated for so long, I really want you to sleep with me. Anyway, it's not the first time we sleep together. I can also help you look after Little Bun." Shao Qing wanted to refuse, but she couldn't think of a reason. She turned to look at Yan Qiue. Yan Qiue immediately said tearfully, "Previously, you were considerate of my body and slept with me. You even got up in the middle of the night to find medicine to make soup for me. Now that you have them, you don't want me anymore." "I don't care, I want to sleep with you." Shao Qing thought for a while, then tore the 2 men from her body and threw them out. Dai and Yan Qiue who were thrown at the door were speechless. Shao Qing slept until 11 o'clock in the middle of the night. Shao Qing's 5 senses were very sharp, so she immediately sensed that someone came in. She didn't even bother to move, because the person had already climbed to the double sleeping bag. This sleeping bag was modified and was dismantled to look like a mattress on the floor. In the past, Dai also liked to sleep together. The 3 of them couldn't sleep together, so they had to dismantle it. As soon as the person came over, Shao Qing knew that it was Dai without even opening her eyes. Dai was lying in front of the sleeping bag sneakily. He looked at Shao Qing and her mother for a while, then he sneaked into the bed. When he first came in, he was afraid that he would wake Shao Qing up and be kicked out, so he slept by the side with his limbs curled up. But soon, he involuntarily turned into an octopus and wrapped himself around Shao Qing's body. Not long after Dai came in, another person lifted the door curtain and sneaked in. This person was more decisive than Dai, and he crawled into the bed without saying a word. Then, that person was stunned, because there was an Dai lying on Shao Qing's body. As expected, the one who strikes first gains the upper hand. Yan Qiue gritted his teeth as he thought. Then he wrapped himself around Shao Qing's other side. The 2 of them looked at each other, and neither of them was willing to show weakness. Lying in the bed, Little Bun was very uncomfortable from being squeezed. He hugged Jia and nudged Yan Qiue with his little butt. Shao Qing reached out and scooped Little Bun up and put him on her belly. Her action made the 2 men stiffen, and they wanted to shrink into a corner so that they wouldn't be discovered. Shao Qing put a finger to her lips and whispered, "Shoo. Don't wake the baby up. Otherwise, I'll kick both of you out." When the 2 men heard that, Shao Qing tacitly agreed that they didn't have to go out tonight. They were instantly happy. They also knew that it was because of Little Bun, so they were very well behaved and quietly shrank back. Little Bun slept very soundly on Shao Qing's belly. He felt that the icy coldness under his body was very comfortable, and he purposely rubbed a few more times. Chapter 213. The night passed uneventfully. When Xiao Qing woke up the next morning, the men sleeping on both sides of her had become octopuses that wrapped themselves around her body. Xiao Qing wanted to get up, but she had to wait for the two men to wake up. She helplessly opened her eyes and counted the crystallic nuclei in the space for a while. When she finished counting the high-level crystallic nuclei, the two men woke up with a steamed bun. The first one to wake up was Dai. When he woke up, Yan Qiue also woke up. Dai was still in a daze, with a strand of hair sticking up on his head, which made Xiao Qing have an urge to rub his head. Yan Qiue, on the other hand, had a different style. He lazily lay on the side and yawned. The corners of his eyes were a little moist, which made him look especially charming. Both of them were the best men, but Xiao Qing acted as if she didn't see them. She carried Little Bun and got up to move her body. If she wasn't a zombie, half of her body would be numb and stiff after one night. As soon as Xiao Qing walked out, the two men immediately followed her. Thus, when Xiao Qing opened the curtain, she attracted countless gazes. Gu Panpan and the others all looked at Xiao Qing and the two men beside her. Especially the one who was in the same tent as Yan Qiue and Dai, their eyes all revealed the same message. I thought he woke up in the middle of the night to pee, but he ended up in Xiao Qing's tent. Shameless. Especially Gu Panpan, who couldn't wait to punch Gu Chuan. Why couldn't her brother learn from these two people and be thick-skinned and pester them? At least he could enter the tent and cultivate some feelings. Xiao Qing expressionlessly ignored those strange gazes and then led Little Bun, who hadn't woken up yet, to brush his teeth. Recently, Little Bun had a new hobby, which was to brush Yiya's teeth. As a mutated rabbit, Yiya was the boss of all the rabbits, but in Little Bun's hands, it could only whimper and be manipulated. Little Bun pulled Yiya's three-petaled lips and squeezed some toothpaste onto his toothbrush. He brushed Yiya's front teeth very seriously. His sharp front teeth were brushed until they shone brightly, but Yiya's eyes had already turned white. Imagining a rabbit being forced to pinch its mouth to brush its teeth, Xiao Qing somewhat sympathized with Yiya. After the whole family brushed their teeth and washed their faces together, Xiao Qing washed her hands and prepared to make breakfast. The assistant was still Yan Hanqing. He squatted on the ground and picked the wild vegetables, then cut them into sections and slices them for Xiao Qing. Xiao Qing's group was the most leisurely paranormal team. Other than them, no other paranormal team could eat fresh porridge in the wild. The porridge wasn't plain porridge, but a variety of porridge, such as spinach and shrimp porridge, vegetable porridge, fish porridge, 8 treasures porridge, and the most common porridge was all kinds of wild vegetable and meat porridge. It was almost different every day, which made Gu Panpan and the others' appetites very good. Even before the apocalypse, they didn't eat so much every morning. Xiao Qing was worried about their nutrition, so she often went to the nearby forest to get some bird eggs and wild eggs and cooked them for breakfast. There was no shortage of milk and other things. It was rare to see such a comfortable life after the apocalypse, and even more so among paranormal teams in the wild. When paranormal teams were in the wild, they would cook their own dry food, roast it, or eat it. At most, they would hunt some wild animals and roast them. It was rare to see someone like Xiao Qing, who was particular about the taste of the food, soup, and dessert. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.